Philosophy. If a terrorist group killed 10,000 people with bioweapons, we'd call it terrorism. When corporations do it for profit, we call it bad business practices. That ends with me. October 2024, the bureaucratic campaign begins. HHS headquarters, Washington, D.C. Dr. Reyes storms into the Deputy Secretary's office with a folder thick enough to use as a weapon. We have a pharmaceutical holocaust happening in West Africa, and we're treating it like a trade violation, she snaps, not bothering with pleasantries. Deputy Secretary Morgan looks up, weary. Helena, we've discussed this. Discussed. We've discussed it. 10,000 people are dead. That's not a discussion point, that's a body count. She slams the folder on his desk. Counterfeit antimalarials, fake vaccines, subtherapeutic antibiotics. And every piece of evidence points back to Chinese state-owned pharmaceutical manufacturers operating with Beijing's tacit approval. The FDA is working with Nigerian regulators. The FDA is playing regulatory whack-a-mole while children die. Her voice cracks slightly. She steadies herself. We need a different framework. This isn't a regulatory problem. It's a national security crisis with health consequences. Or a health crisis with national security implications. Either way, commerce and state aren't equipped to handle it. Morgan leans back. What are you proposing? I want to convene an interagency task force under Presidential Policy Directive 44, the Health Security Directive. I want HHS leading, not following. I want CDC epidemiologists, FDA investigators, and ASPR, Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response medical teams on the ground. And I want us framing this the way it should be framed, as a deliberate public health attack. That's aggressive language. Aggressive. David, if a terrorist group released fake vaccines that killed 10,000 people, what would we call it? We'd call it bioterrorism, but because it's a state actor doing it for profit instead of ideology, we pretend it's just bad business practices. Morgan studies her. If we frame it that way, you're asking for a response that goes beyond health policy. You're asking for DoD involvement. Good, because FDA inspectors can't board ships in international waters. But special forces can. The Interagency Task Force forms. November 2024, Presidential Policy Directive 44 implementation. The Global Health Security Threat Assessment Team convenes for the first time. Participants. HHS. Drive. Helena Reyes Chair. CDC. Drive. Amara Okafor via secure video from Lagos. FDA. Commissioner David Park. State Department. Assistant Secretary for African Affairs. DoD, Assistant Secretary for Health Affairs. NSC, Senior Director for Global Health Security. DIA, Deputy Administrator Pharmaceutical Trafficking. Treasury, OFAC Representative. Justice, International Criminal Investigations. Dr. Reyes opens the session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I'm going to begin with something you rarely hear from HHS. We need a military operation. Not because I love the military, I'm a doctor, I deal with what the military creates. But because we're facing a threat that health policy alone cannot stop. Let me walk you through the evidence. The health policy case, building the framework. Presentation slides excerpted. Slide 3, the mortality data. Confirmed deaths from counterfeit Chinese pharmaceuticals, West Africa, 2023-2024. Antimalarials, 4,200 deaths. Antibiotics, 2,900 deaths. Cardiovascular medications, 1,800 deaths. Pediatric vaccines, 1,100 deaths, includes measles, polio outbreak casualties. Total, 10,000 deaths, conservative estimate. Comparison, Ebola epidemic 2014-2016, 11,310 deaths. COVID-19 first wave in Nigeria 2020, 3,155 deaths. We're looking at mortality on par with major epidemic diseases, but it's intentional, ongoing, and for profit. Slide 7. The public health infrastructure collapse. It's not just about deaths. Counterfeit medications destroy trust in healthcare systems. Nigeria data 2024. Vaccine hesitancy increased 340% since 2022. Parents refusing childhood immunizations. 42%, up from 12%. Reason cited. Can't trust if vaccines are real. Result, resurgence of eradicated diseases. Measles cases, plus 670%. Diphtheria cases, plus 240%. Polio cases, 14 first cases since 2020. We spent decades building vaccination infrastructure. Chinese counterfeiters destroyed it in 18 months. Slide 12. The economic burden. Direct medical costs Nigeria, 2023-2024. Treatment of counterfeit drug victims, $280 million. Outbreak response preventable diseases, $140 million. Lost health worker productivity, $89 million. Healthcare system trust rebuilding, $200 million estimated. Indirect costs. Lost economic productivity, $890 million. Tourism decline, $120 million. Foreign investment deterrence, $2.1 billion. Total economic impact, $3.8 billion, 2.8% of Nigerian GDP. This isn't just a health crisis. It's an economic weapon. Slide 18. The legal framework gap. Current authorities are insufficient. FDA authority stops at U.S. borders. Can ban imports to U.S. Cannot interdict international trafficking. No enforcement capability in territorial waters of other nations. Interpol WHO. Coordinate but don't enforce. Can issue alerts. Can facilitate information sharing. Cannot seize vessels, arrest traffickers, or stop shipments in transit. Nigerian authorities, overwhelmed and under-resourced. NAFDAC has 800 inspectors for 200 million people. No naval interdiction capability. Corruption compromises enforcement. Result: massive enforcement gap that allows trafficking to continue with impunity. Slide 24. The proposed solution. Operation Antidote, a health security enforcement model. Phase 1. Intelligence and evidence. HHS, CDC, FDA lead epidemiological investigation. Establish medical causation linking deaths to specific counterfeit sources. Document supply chains from manufacture to distribution. Phase 2. Multilateral health emergency declaration. WHO Emergency Committee convened. Public health emergency of international concern PHEIC considered. Regional health authorities African CDC, ECOWAS declare crisis. Phase 3. Enforcement authorization. Nigerian government requests assistance under bilateral health security agreement. U.S. provides military assets for maritime interdiction DoD. HHS provides medical support, pharmaceutical verification, victim treatment. Phase 4. Health system restoration. Pharmaceutical supply chain verification systems installed. Regional laboratory capacity enhanced. Vaccination campaigns restarted with verified supplies. Long-term health surveillance established. This is not a military operation with health components. This is a health operation with military enabling. The bureaucratic battle. November 15, 2024. Deputies Committee meeting, White House Situation Room. The proposal hits resistance immediately. State Department Deputy. This sets a dangerous precedent. We're talking about military action based on pharmaceutical violations. That's a massive expansion of what constitutes a security threat. Dr. Reyes. 10,000 dead isn't a security threat. Measles outbreaks aren't a security threat. The complete collapse of public health infrastructure isn't a security threat. DoD Deputy. I'm sympathetic, Drive. Reyes, but we need to be clear about what we're asking the military to do. Board Chinese flagged vessels in international waters based on pharmaceutical evidence. Dr. Reyes, that's exactly what I'm asking. We already interdict drug trafficking vessels. We already board ships suspected of WMD proliferation. Why is counterfeit medication that kills thousands somehow less important than cocaine that kills hundreds? Treasury Deputy, the legal framework is different. Dr. Reyes, the legal framework is inadequate. That's my entire point. We built 20th century laws for 21st century threats. Chinese state actors figured out they can kill thousands of Africans with fake medicine, and because it's not a gun or a bomb, we tie ourselves in legal knots. She pulls out a photograph, patient Socorro's son, the boy with brain damage from the counterfeit measles vaccine. This child will never speak, never walk, never have a normal life. Because someone in Guangdong decided to put saline in a vial, print, measles vaccine, on it, and sell it for profit. His mother paid money she didn't have to protect him, and instead she poisoned him. How many more children before we stop pretending this is a regulatory issue? Silence. NSC Deputy. Drive. Reyes, I think everyone in this room agrees the problem is real. The question is whether we can build a legal and diplomatic framework that allows us to act without triggering a broader crisis with China. Dr. Reyes. Then let's build it. Give me 60 days to coordinate with state, DOD, justice. Let me work with the Nigerian government to formalize the request. Let me get WHO and African Union buy-in. But I need a commitment from this group that if we can build the framework, we'll actually use it. Deputy National Security Advisor. We'll brief the principals. If they approve the planning phase, you'll have your 60 days. Marcus Chen, the environmental justice warrior. Background: Marcus Chen, 34, Chinese-American environmental lawyer and activist. Credentials: JD MPA Yale Law and Public Affairs. Former attorney, Environmental Defense Fund. Founded, Waters Without Borders, NGO focused on international marine pollution. Known for aggressive litigation against corporate polluters. Controversial for targeting Chinese companies despite his heritage, has received death threats. Personal motivation: grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown. Grandmother survived the Great Leap Forward famine. He sees modern Chinese corporate practices as betraying the values she fought to preserve. His philosophy: my ancestors survived Mao. I won't watch their descendants become Mao. November 2024, The Environmental Investigation. Waters Without Borders Office, Brooklyn. Marcus stares at water sample analysis from the Niger Delta. The numbers don't just concern him, they terrify him. This isn't industrial runoff, he says to Dr. Patricia Osei, Ghanaian marine biologist, his lead scientist. This is deliberate dumping of industrial waste at concentrations that suggest no treatment whatsoever. Dr. Osei nods grimly. The mercury levels alone would require these containers to be treated as hazardous waste under Basel Convention protocols. Instead, they're just tossing them overboard. Do we have satellite confirmation? Yes. Look at this. She pulls up nighttime infrared imagery. Chinese vessels designated as fishing fleet, showing thermal signatures consistent with pumping operations. They're dumping at night, in international waters just outside Nigerian territorial limits. Marcus leans back, calculating. If we go public with this, we need it to be airtight. The moment we accuse Chinese state enterprises of systematic environmental crimes, we're going to face a legal and propaganda onslaught. We have the evidence. Evidence isn't enough. We need a strategy. The strategic calculation. November 2024. Marcus's strategy memo, internal to Waters Without Borders. Memo. Operation Toxic Tide, Advocacy Strategy. Objective: stop Chinese industrial waste dumping in West African waters and hold responsible parties legally and financially accountable. Problem: traditional environmental advocacy, lawsuits, publicity, NGO pressure, is insufficient when dealing with state-backed actors who ignore international norms. Solution: multi-vector approach combining legal, diplomatic, media, and governmental pressure. Phase 1. Document the crime completed. Water sampling showing toxic contamination. Satellite imagery proving dumping activity. Health data linking contamination to community illness. Supply chain analysis identifying specific Chinese companies. Phase 2. Build the legal case, in progress. Prepare Basel Convention violation charges. Prepare UNCLOS UN Convention on Law of the Sea claims. Coordinate with Nigerian AG Office on domestic charges. Prepare civil litigation in U.S. courts, Alien Tort Statute. Phase 3. Create public pressure planned. Release documentary evidence through media partners. Coordinate with affected communities for testimonials. Engage celebrity advocates. Leonardo DiCaprio, Jane Fonda have expressed interest. Social media campaign targeting younger demographics. Phase 4. Governmental engagement critical. This is where we need to be strategic. Environmental crises rarely trigger military responses. But if we can link environmental crimes to existing health, security operations, we can piggyback on their momentum. Recommendation: reach out to Dr. Helena Reyes, HHS, and coordinate our environmental evidence with her pharmaceutical trafficking investigation. Theory: combined health plus environmental case is stronger than either alone. The alliance forms. December 2024, HHS headquarters. Dr. Reyes and Marcus Chen meet for the first time. There's immediate mutual recognition, two people who've realized traditional advocacy channels are broken and are willing to work in unconventional ways. You're the one who sued Exxon pro bono for 3 years, Reyes says. You're the one who got the Counterfeit Drug Prosecution Act passed over pharma lobby objections, Marcus counters. They both smile. Kindred spirits. Marcus, I'll be direct. I need your help making environmental crimes matter enough to trigger enforcement. Nobody cares about mercury in fish guts. But combined with your fake vaccine crisis, now we're talking about systematic attack on vulnerable populations. Dr. Reyes, I was going to say the same thing in reverse. Counterfeit drugs are horrifying, but they're abstract to most people. Toxic dumping, visible pollution, poisoned water, sick fishermen, that's visceral. It makes the crime tangible. Marcus, so we coordinate. Your medical evidence, my environmental evidence. Joint press conferences. Shared legal strategy. Dr. Reyes, more than that. I'm building toward a military enforcement operation. I need environmental crimes to be part of the justification framework. Can you deliver evidence that's court admissible and media ready? Marcus, I can deliver evidence that will make people physically ill when they see it. Is that media ready enough? Dr. Reyes, perfect. The Joint Brief, March 2025, National Security Council Principals Committee. Dr. Reyes and Marcus Chen present together. The presentation, Twin Crises, Single Solution. Dr. Reyes presents the health dimension, 15 minutes. 10,000 deaths from counterfeit pharmaceuticals. Collapse of vaccination infrastructure. Resurgence of preventable diseases. Economic burden of $3.8 billion. Marcus Chen presents the environmental dimension, 15 minutes. 47,000 tons of toxic waste dumped. 4.2 million people at risk from contaminated fish. Ecological collapse of fisheries. Long-term cancer and neurological disease epidemic. Joint conclusion, 5 minutes. These aren't separate crises. They're a systematic pattern of Chinese state actors exploiting weak enforcement to commit what we can only describe as slow-motion genocide for profit. They dump toxic waste because there's no enforcement. They sell fake medicine because there's no enforcement. They poison fishing grounds because there's no enforcement. And the longer we treat each issue as separate regulatory problems, the more people die. We need an integrated response that addresses all vectors simultaneously. Maritime interdiction to stop dumping and trafficking. Medical intervention to treat existing victims. Environmental remediation to restore ecosystems. Legal prosecution to establish deterrence. That response is Operation Antidote. Secretary of State, you're asking us to frame environmental crimes as justification for military action. That's unprecedented. Marcus, with respect, Madam Secretary, no it's not. The U.S. military has conducted environmental security operations before. What's unprecedented is the scale and state-backed nature of the crimes. Secretary of Defense, what specific environmental remediation can we accomplish with a military operation? Dr. Osei, Marcus's lead scientist, brought in for this presentation several things. 1. Stop ongoing dumping immediately. Naval presence deters continuation. 2. Recover existing containers. Navy has deep-sea recovery capability. 3. Secure toxic sites. Prevent further spread during cleanup. 4. Enable civilian remediation. Military provides security for EPA and Nigerian equivalent teams to work safely. The military doesn't clean the environment, but it creates the conditions where cleaning becomes possible. National Security Advisor, and you believe combining health and environmental justifications strengthens our legal and diplomatic position? Dr. Reyes, absolutely. Some countries care more about health, some about environment. Together, we build a broader coalition. And frankly, the combined evidence is so overwhelming it becomes nearly impossible to defend Chinese actions. President Henderson, who's been listening quietly, walk me through the victim narrative. Not the statistics, the people. Marcus pulls up photographs. Patience Okoro, her son brain damaged by fake vaccine. She's the health crisis personified. James Effiong, fisherman whose hands shake so badly from mercury poisoning he can't work. He's the environmental crisis personified. Both poisoned by Chinese companies. Both Nigerian citizens whose government asked for our help. Both preventable if we'd acted sooner. And there are thousands more. Long pause. President Henderson, approved for planning. Dr. Reyes, Mr. Chen, you're part of the operation now. I want health and environmental components embedded from the start, not added as afterthoughts. Part 6. Operation Antidote, the Convergence. The planning phase. December 2024 to March 2025. The operation architecture. Total budget, $862.9 million over 5 years. Breakdown. Direct operation costs $357 million. Military deployment, $248 million. Medical support 30 days, $67 million. Intelligence collection, $34 million. Legal preparation, $8 million. Information operations $18.9 million. Documentary production, $4.2 million. Social media campaigns, $8.7 million. Media coordination, $3.1 million. Influencer partnerships, $2.9 million. Long-term medical program 5 years, $355 million. Treatment for identified victims, $89 million. Expanded screening programs, $34 million. Pharmaceutical verification systems, $45 million. Environmental remediation, $120 million. Cancer surveillance, $67 million. Infrastructure development $132 million. Regional medical facilities, $78 million. Laboratory capacity building, $23 million. Pharmaceutical regulation enhancement, $31 million. The medical component, USNS Comfort deployment. The 1,000-bed hospital ship repositioned to Dakar, Senegal 48 hours sailing time from operational area. Capabilities. Radiation oncology suite. Bone marrow transplant capability. Burn unit 50-bed capacity. Decontamination facilities 200 personnel per hour processing. Chelation therapy for heavy metal poisoning. Pharmaceutical testing laboratory. Cost, $8.2 million 14-day activation. PSYOPs element. Ship's presence leaked to media 3 days before operation. Message, we're prepared to save lives, not just take action. The environmental component. Team Sierra. Environmental Recovery Unit. Composition, U.S. Navy Mobile Diving and Salvage Unit. EPA Emergency Response Team. Nigerian National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency. Waters Without Borders Technical Advisors including Marcus Chen. Mission, locate and recover toxic waste containers dumped in previous months. Equipment, underwater ROVs remotely operated vehicles with chemical radiation sensors. Deep sea recovery cranes. Hazmat containment systems. Mobile laboratory for field testing. D-Day, April 19, 2026, the integrated operation. 3 o'clock hours, simultaneous multi-vector strike. Vector 1, pharmaceutical interdiction. Nigerian SBS and U.S. SEALs board MV Fujo Prosperity and 6 associated vessels. Seizures, 340 tons of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. Financial records linking to Chinese SOEs. Communications proving deliberate quality reduction. Distribution networks across 14 African countries. Key evidence, intercepted email. The Nigerian market isn't sophisticated. They can't test every batch. 15% active ingredient is sufficient to avoid immediate mass deaths. Maximize profit per container. That single message became the centerpiece of the prosecution. Vector 2, toxic waste recovery. 4:30 hours, MV Dalian progress. While pharmaceutical teams worked forward holds, Team Sierra moved to the stern. Marcus Chen, in full hazmat gear, directed operations. According to our SAT data, they dumped containers here 2 weeks ago. Depth is only 40 meters, well within recovery range. Navy divers deployed ROVs. 4:52 hours, first contact. We've got something, the ROV operator announced. On screen, a barrel with faded Chinese characters. Marcus zoomed in. Shenzhen Yuan Fei Wu, Shenzhen Hospital Waste. Same marking as the container we recovered in January. Get it up. 6:15 hours, first container secured. The barrel broke surface, dripping seawater and something darker. Geiger counters clicked, elevated but not dangerous. EPA technician Sarah Martinez cracked the seal. The smell hit immediately, chemical solvents mixed with biological decay. Medical waste, she confirmed. Sharps, contaminated bandages, chemical. Bottles. Some radioactive markers still present. This is exactly what they're not supposed to be dumping. Marcus documented everything on camera. This footage would be in courtrooms for years. By 1800 hours, recovery complete. 23 barrels recovered, 8 industrial containers, 4 drums of liquid chemical waste. Total toxic material, 14.7 tons. Economic analysis. Estimated cost to dispose properly in China, $2.8 million. What Chinese companies paid to dump? $180,000. Profit motive. $2.62 million saved per operation. Vector 3. Medical Field Operations. Team Lima. Medical Environmental Field Hospital. Lagos University Teaching Hospital, Field Site Alpha. Dr. Reyes had pushed hard for this component. We're not just interdicting the threat, we're treating the victims. That's what makes this humanitarian, not punitive. The field hospital treated 340 patients in first 72 hours. Typical case. Patient. Emmanuel Ocone, age 38, fisherman. Symptoms. Tremor in both hands. Memory problems. Fatigue. Recurring headaches. History. Fished exclusively in Bonny Island area for 15 years. Symptoms started 18 months ago. Testing. Blood mercury. 89 mcg/L, safe limit, less than 10. Lead. 45 mcg per deciliter concerning it greater than 10. Kidney function. Early stage chronic kidney disease. Treatment. Chelation therapy, DMSA for lead, DMPS for mercury. Kidney function monitoring. Nutritional supplementation. Temporary financial assistance to avoid fishing in contaminated areas. Documentation. Hair sample preserved shows 18-month accumulation timeline. GPS data of fishing locations matches dumping sites. Photographed for media, legal use with consent. Cost per patient. $12,000 minus $18,000 initial plus 6-month follow-up. Total first wave. $4 minus $6 million for 340 patients. But every treated patient became a living witness to Chinese crimes. The media campaign. April 19, 2026, 8 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time coordinated release. Every major outlet received the same carefully edited package. Video 1. The Raid, 4:37. Nigerian SBS boarding vessels. SEAL teams securing cargo holds. Discovery of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. Recovery of toxic waste containers. Crucially, American medic treating wounded Chinese security guard. Psychological impact. Demonstrates professionalism, restraint, humanitarian concern. Video 2. The evidence, 6:12. Close-ups of counterfeit medication packages. Environmental testing showing mercury, lead levels. Serial numbers traced to Chinese factories. Financial records showing profit calculations. Psychological impact. Makes abstract threat tangible. Video 3. The victims, 8:45. Patients Okoro and her disabled son. James Effiong with trembling hands. Dr. Okafor explaining medical evidence. Children in hospitals, fishing villages struggling. Psychological impact. Humanizes the cost, generates empathy. The Nigerian government response. President Adeyemi press conference, 8 o'clock local time. Today, Nigerian forces, with the support of our American allies, have interdicted a grave threat to our people. For too long, our waters have been exploited. Our fishermen have been poisoned. Our children have been given fake vaccines. Our sovereignty has been disrespected. Today, that ends. We have seized vessels carrying counterfeit medications that have killed thousands. We have recovered toxic waste illegally dumped in our waters. We have evidence linking these crimes to Chinese state enterprises. This is not anti-China. This is pro-Nigeria, pro-African, pro-human dignity, and to any nation or company that thinks Africa is a dumping ground for the world's toxins or a market for the world's frauds. You are wrong. And you will face consequences. The international response. Within 24 hours, ECOWAS, unanimous resolution praising Nigerian-US cooperation. African Union, call for international investigation. WHO, emergency committee convened. France, UK, Japan, public support for enforcement action. EU, fast-tracked sanctions against implicated companies. China's response, furious denunciations of piracy and neocolonialism. But the evidence was too overwhelming. Even traditional Chinese allies stayed silent. Part 7, the channel's TV special report. Contextual integration. 3 weeks after Operation Antidote, as international attention focused on the Gulf of Guinea crisis, UK and other Western governments updated their travel advisories for Nigeria, citing both long-standing security concerns and the new Chinese-related tensions. Channel's TV special report. UK travel advisory on Nigeria. April 30, 2026, 2000 WAT. Studio lights illuminate. The channel's TV set, modern and professional, features a curved desk with embedded screens. The anchor, Sun Okunbaloyi, sits center, flanked by 4 guests in a semicircle arrangement. Soon Okunbaloyi anchor, good evening, and welcome to this special edition of Channels Television. Tonight, we're examining the updated UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office Travel Advisory for Nigeria, a document that sparked considerable debate given recent developments in the Gulf of Guinea. The timing is significant. Just 3 weeks after Operation Antidote successfully interdicted Chinese pharmaceutical trafficking and toxic waste dumping, Western governments are updating their Nigeria assessments. Are these advisories based on security realities, or are they influenced by the current geopolitical climate? We have with us distinguished guests to help us understand. Camera pans across guests. Introducing Ms. Catherine Thornhill, UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, West Africa Security Liaison. Professor Balaji Adewale, Security Studies, University of Lagos. Commander Sarah Okonkwo Ret, Nigerian Navy Special Boat Service, now Security Consultant, the same officer who led Operation Tidebreak. Mr. David Richardson, British expatriate, Managing Director of Richardson & Associates, resident in Lagos for 12 years. Soon, Ms. Thornhill, let's begin with you. The FCDO has issued what many consider a fairly restrictive advisory. Can you walk us through the key points? Catherine Thornhill, mid-40s, professional, measured tone, thank you, soon. I want to be clear from the outset, our travel advisories are based solely on security assessments, not political considerations. The safety of British nationals is our only concern. The advisory warns against all travel to 6 northern states, Borno, Yobe, Adamawa, Gombe, plus parts of Bauchi and Kaduna, due to the continuing threat from Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa Province. We've seen regular military operations in these areas, and the risk of retaliatory attacks remains high. We also advise against all but essential travel to certain areas in Bayelsa, Delta, and River states in the South due to militancy and kidnapping risks. And we've added new guidance regarding the Gulf of Guinea maritime security situation, given recent. Soon interrupting politely, forgive me, but let's address that directly. Operation Antidote successfully stopped Chinese criminal activity in Nigerian waters. Nigerian and American forces worked together. Shouldn't that make the region safer, not more dangerous? Catherine Thornhill, it's not that simple. While we commend the operation's success, there's concern about potential Chinese retaliation, economic disruptions, and Professor Adewale interrupting, animated potential Chinese retaliation. With respect, Ms. Thornhill, that sounds like we're being penalized for enforcing our own laws. The Chinese were dumping toxic waste and fake medicine. We stopped them, and now British nationals are being advised not to come here because we might have upset the criminals. Audience murmurs. Soon, Professor, you're suggesting the advisory is unfair. Professor Adewale, mid-50s, gray beard, passionate, I'm suggesting it's inconsistent. Look, I'm not naive. Nigeria has security challenges. The Northeast, yes, there are real threats from insurgent groups. The Southeast has secessionist tensions. Parts of the Niger Delta have oil-related militancy. But we're a country of 200 million people spread across 923,000 square kilometers. Saying, Nigeria is dangerous, because of problems in specific regions is like saying, Europe is dangerous, because there are issues in specific areas. And now, after we successfully defend our sovereignty and protect our people, we're being warned against. The implication is that standing up for ourselves makes us more dangerous to visit. Commander Okonkwo, lean, intense, with the bearing of a career military officer, may I add something? Soon, please, Commander. Your perspective is particularly valuable given your role in both Tidebreak and Antidote. Commander Okonkwo, thank you. I've operated in these waters for 15 years. Before Operation Tidebreak, we had Chinese vessels trafficking nuclear material. Before Operation Antidote, we had systematic poisoning of our coastal populations. Now, those threats are substantially reduced. Our waters are safer, our ports are more secure. International cooperation is stronger, but the travel advisory makes it sound like we're in crisis. The truth is the opposite, we're emerging from a crisis that was imposed on us by external actors. Ms. Thornhill, I mean no disrespect, but when your advisory warns British nationals about instability in the Gulf of Guinea, without clarifying that the instability was caused by Chinese criminal operations that we've now stopped, you're inadvertently punishing the victim. Catherine Thornhill, uncomfortable but professional commander, I understand your frustration. But our advisory process is evidence-based. We look at incident reports, Threat assessments. David Richardson interrupting, British accent, mid-40s, casually dressed. Can I speak to the actual experience of living here? Soon, Mr. Richardson, yes, please. You've been in Lagos for over a decade. David Richardson, 12 years. I run a logistics company. My family is here, my wife is Nigerian, our children go to school in Victoria Island. And I'm aware of the UK advisory. Here's my honest assessment. Lagos is safer than many British cities I've lived in. London has knife crime, Manchester has gang issues, Nigeria has its own problems, but they're geographically specific. I wouldn't go to Borno State without serious security, just like I wouldn't wander through certain parts of London at 3 a.m. It's common sense, not some existential threat. But what concerns me about this advisory is the timing. 3 weeks after Nigeria and the US successfully stopped massive criminal operations. It feels political. Catherine Thornhill firmly, Mr. Richardson, I must push back. Our advisories are not political tools. David Richardson, then why does the advisory spend 3 paragraphs on potential economic disruption due to diplomatic tensions, but only one sentence mentioning that Nigerian forces successfully removed thousands of tons of counterfeit medication and toxic waste from circulation? Tense pause. Professor Adewale, that's the question, isn't it? The advisory reads like Nigeria did something wrong by defending itself. Soon, Ms. Thornhill, how do you respond to that characterization? Catherine Thornhill measured, careful. Our advisory reflects multiple risk factors. Yes, Operation Antidote was successful in its stated objectives. But any major security operation creates secondary effects. There's increased maritime traffic, heightened surveillance, potential for miscalculation. Commander Okonkwo leaning forward, miscalculation by whom? By Nigeria, who followed international law, or by China, who violated it systematically for years? Catherine Thornhill, Commander, I'm not here to adjudicate international disputes. I'm here to explain why we've advised British nationals to exercise caution. Soon, let me pose a direct question to everyone. Do you believe the UK advisory is motivated by legitimate security concerns, or by pressure from China given its economic relationship with the UK? Long pause. Professor Adewale smiles. Professor Adewale, you're asking us to speculate on UK government motivations. I'll say this, China is the UK's third largest trading partner. Chinese investment in UK infrastructure is substantial. It would be politically inconvenient for the UK to enthusiastically endorse operations that embarrassed Beijing. But I don't want to be unfair. Ms. Thornhill is probably sincere in her security assessment. The question is whether the assessment framework itself is influenced by broader diplomatic considerations. David Richardson, I'll be more blunt. I have friends in the Foreign Office. Unofficially, they've told me there's enormous pressure to not inflame tensions with China. The advisory is carefully worded to sound security-focused, but the subtext is, don't make us choose sides. Catherine Thornhill, Mr. Richardson, I cannot speak to unofficial conversations, but I can assure you. Commander Okonkwo, Ms. Thornhill, let me ask you something directly. When Chinese vessels were dumping toxic waste that poisoned Nigerian fishermen, when counterfeit Chinese medications were killing Nigerian children, did the FCDO issue any advisories warning about those threats? Silence. Commander Okonkwo, no, you didn't, because those threats weren't to British nationals, they were to Nigerians. And frankly, that's fine. You protect your citizens. That's your job. But now that we've protected our citizens, suddenly we're the security concern. Soon. That's a powerful point. Ms. Thornhill, Catherine Thornhill, visibly uncomfortable. Commander, I understand your perspective. But our mandate is specifically British nationals. We assess threats to them. The situation before Operation Antidote didn't pose direct risks to British citizens. The current situation, with increased naval activity, diplomatic tensions, potential economic disruptions, does affect British business operations and residents. Professor Adewale, and there it is. The quiet part said out loud. When Nigerians were being poisoned, that was acceptable background noise. When Nigeria stopped the poisoning and it created diplomatic tensions, suddenly it's a crisis. David Richardson, I think that's harsh, Professor. Ms. Thornhill is doing her job within the framework she's given. But the framework itself is, let's say, revealing. Soon, let's talk specifics. The advisory mentions increased kidnapping risks in the South-South. Commander Okonkwo, Has Operation Antidote actually increased kidnapping? Commander Okonkwo: No. If anything, the increased naval presence has reduced maritime piracy and kidnapping. We have better surveillance, more rapid response capability. The South-South is safer now than it was 6 months ago. But I suspect the advisory is worried about a different kind of kidnapping, Chinese nationals being targeted in retaliation for their government's actions. That's a legitimate concern, actually. But it's not a Nigeria is dangerous problem, it's a Chinese nationals in Nigeria might face risks because of Beijing's policies problem. Soon, is the UK conflating those two issues? Professor Adewale: Absolutely. And it's lazy analysis. Look at the data. Foreign national kidnapping in Nigeria targets specific groups for specific reasons, usually ransom. Chinese nationals might face increased risk given current tensions. But British nationals? There's no evidence their risk profile has changed at all. David Richardson: I'll give you a concrete example. My company works with British expatriates all over Nigeria. Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, even Kano. Since Operation Antidote, we've seen no increase in security incidents involving foreign nationals. None. In fact, our local security consultants are telling us the opposite. The increased Nigerian Navy presence in coastal areas has made logistics and shipping more secure. Soon, so the advisory is based on hypothetical risks rather than actual incidents. Catherine Thornhill: All security advisories are partially predictive. We don't wait for British nationals to be harmed, we try to prevent harm. Commander Okonkwo: But you're predicting harm based on Nigeria taking defensive action against criminal activity. That's perverse. Catherine Thornhill firmly: Commander, with respect, Nigeria conducted a military operation involving boarding foreign vessels, seizing cargo, and arresting foreign nationals. That's not defensive action, that's offensive enforcement. And while it may be legally justified, it creates risks. Professor Adewale: Heated, so what's the alternative? Let Chinese companies keep poisoning our people. Let counterfeit medications keep killing our children. Because enforcing our laws might create diplomatic tensions. Soon. Professor Adewale: No, let me finish. This is exactly the neo-colonial mindset we're supposed to be past. African countries, you can have sovereignty, but don't actually exercise it in ways that inconvenience major powers. Nigeria enforced its laws. We protected our people. We did it with overwhelming evidence, international cooperation, and minimal use of force. We did everything right, by Western standards. And the response is, well, you've made things complicated. Maybe British people shouldn't go there now. Catherine Thornhill: Professor, that is not what the advisory says. Professor Adewale: It's what it implies. And implications matter. When multinationals are deciding where to invest, they read these advisories. When tourists are deciding where to visit, they read these advisories. Your words have consequences for our economy. David Richardson: Can I offer a middle ground? Soon, please. David Richardson: I think the FCDO is genuinely trying to do its job, protect British nationals. And there is uncertainty right now. Operation Antidote was successful, but we don't know yet how China will respond economically or diplomatically. But here's what I wish the advisory had said. Nigeria has successfully addressed major criminal operations in its waters. During the transition period as new security arrangements stabilize, British nationals should remain aware of their surroundings, particularly in coastal and maritime contexts. That's honest. It acknowledges both the positive developments and the transitional uncertainty. It doesn't make Nigeria sound like a war zone. Soon. Ms. Thornhill: Would that language have been possible? Catherine Thornhill: Pause. That's not far from our internal discussions. The challenge is balancing recognition of improvements with caution about unknowns. Commander Okonkwo: The challenge is that your advisory gives China veto power over Nigerian security operations. If every time we enforce our laws, we get hit with negative travel advisories, then we can never actually exercise sovereignty. Soon. Let's shift to the northeast. Ms. Thornhill: The advisory warns against all travel to Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa. Professor Adewale: Is that assessment accurate? Professor Adewale: Calmer now. Yes. The Northeast remains genuinely dangerous due to Boko Haram and ISWAP. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. The Nigerian military has made progress, but these groups still control territory and conduct attacks. So that part of the advisory? Completely justified. British nationals shouldn't be in the Northeast without serious security arrangements. Commander Okonkwo, agreed. And that's the frustrating part. When the FCDO gets it right, like the Northeast assessment, we have no quarrel. It's when they conflate that situation with the Gulf of Guinea, which is fundamentally different, that we object. David Richardson, from a business perspective, we've always advised clients that the Northeast is high risk. That's been consistent for years. What's new, and concerning, is the expanded advisory for southern regions based on speculation rather than incidents. Soon, what about the Southeast? The advisory mentions secessionist groups. Professor Adewale, the Southeast has political tensions around the indigenous people of Biafra movement. There have been incidents, attacks on security forces, enforcement of illegal sit-at-home orders. It's a real issue, but again, it's geographically specific. Certain areas are more tense than others. And it's not typically targeting foreigners. David Richardson, I've traveled through the Southeast multiple times in the past year. With common sense precautions, monitoring local news, avoiding demonstrations, working with local security, it's manageable. It's not Mogadishu. Soon, Commander Okonkwo, from a security professional's perspective, what should British nationals actually know about Nigeria right now? Commander Okonkwo, thoughtful, okay, here's my honest assessment. High risk, avoid, Borno, Yobe, Adamawa, Northern Kaduna. Active insurgency, regular attacks, minimal infrastructure. Unless you're military, aid worker with security, or journalist with serious preparations, don't go. Elevated risk, caution required. Parts of Southeast during political tensions, certain rural areas of Niger Delta, border regions with problematic neighbors. You can operate there, but you need local knowledge, security awareness, and contingency plans. Moderate risk, normal precautions. Major cities like Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano. Same level of caution you'd use in any major city anywhere. Don't flash wealth, be aware of surroundings, avoid high-risk areas at night. Low risk, international business districts, gated communities, upscale areas of major cities. Frankly, safer than many Western cities. The Gulf of Guinea maritime situation. Actually safer now than 6 months ago. We have better monitoring, more international cooperation, reduced criminal activity. Soon, Ms. Thornhill, does that align with your assessment? Catherine Thornhill reluctantly, that's not too dissimilar from our internal risk mapping. Though we might be slightly more conservative on some categories. Professor Adewale, which brings us back to the question, why does the public advisory read so much more alarmist than the actual risk assessment? Soon, that's a question I think many Nigerians are asking. Let me pose this to everyone, what impact will this advisory have? David Richardson, economically, significant. Companies use these advisories for insurance purposes, duty of care assessments, investment decisions. An overly cautious advisory costs Nigeria opportunities. Professor Adewale, it also reinforces negative stereotypes. Nigeria is dangerous, becomes received wisdom, regardless of reality. That affects everything from tourism to international partnerships to how our diaspora is treated abroad. Commander Okonkwo, from a security perspective, it actually makes my job harder. When Western governments signal that Nigeria is unstable, it emboldens hostile actors who think we're isolated. If the message was, Nigeria successfully defended itself and is a reliable security partner, that would deter future criminal activity. Catherine Thornhill, I hear these concerns. I will take them back to London. But I cannot promise the advisory will change in the near term. Soon, why not? Catherine Thornhill carefully, because advisories are conservative instruments. They're easier to maintain than to modify. Changing them requires proving a negative, that risks have decreased, which is harder than pointing to potential risks. Professor Adewale, in other words, once you've labeled somewhere dangerous, you're reluctant to update even when conditions improve. Catherine Thornhill, it's more complicated than that, but there's an institutional inertia, yes. David Richardson, which means Nigeria gets punished twice. Once by the Chinese criminal activity, then again by the advisory responses to Nigeria stopping it. Soon, let me ask a final question to each of you, what should happen next? Catherine Thornhill, the FCDO should continue monitoring the situation. If Nigerian security improvements are sustained and no British nationals face increased threats, we can consider updating the advisory. But that's a months-long process, not weeks. Professor Adewale, Nigeria should continue enforcing its laws regardless of Western advisory responses. We cannot allow travel warnings to become veto points. But we should also engage diplomatically, make clear to the UK that these advisories have economic consequences, and we expect fairness in assessment. Commander Okonkwo, the Nigerian government should publish its own security data transparently. Show the world that maritime incidents are down, that cooperation with international partners is working, that we're a reliable security actor. Let the facts speak. David Richardson, Western governments should develop more nuanced advisory frameworks. Not everything is safe or dangerous. Give people actual information to make informed decisions. And acknowledge when things improve, not just when they deteriorate. Soon, Ms. Thornhill, final word. Catherine Thornhill, I appreciate this conversation. It's been challenging, but valuable. I want Nigerian viewers to know that the UK has no interest in unfairly portraying Nigeria. We're trying to protect our citizens. If our methods need refinement, that's a conversation worth having. Soon. Thank you all for a robust discussion. This is clearly an issue that touches on security, economics, diplomacy, and national dignity. To our viewers, Nigeria faces real security challenges in some regions. But it's also a country that just successfully defended itself against systematic criminal exploitation. Both things can be true. Travel advisories matter, but they should reflect reality, not politics. And they should acknowledge when countries make progress, not just when they face setbacks. Thank you for watching this channel's TV special report. Good night. Studio lights fade. Post-broadcast analysis. The impact of the channel's TV discussion. Immediate response 24 hours. Nigerian social media. Nigeria is not dangerous trended for 18 hours. 2.3 million tweets posts. 78% supporting Professor Adewale and CMDR. Okonkwo's positions. Video clips of tense exchanges viewed 45 million times. UK response. FCDO issued statement. Our advisories are evidence-based and apolitical. British tabloids ran stories. Navy hero schools UK diplomat on Nigeria. The Guardian op-ed. Are we punishing Nigeria for defending itself? International business community. Several multinational CEOs publicly questioned advisory basis. Insurance companies requested meetings with FCDO for clarification. Nigerian stock exchange gained 3.2% on perception of unfair treatment. The larger context. PSYOPs meets reality. The channel's TV broadcast became an unexpected PSYOPs victory. Here's why. Narrative elements. 1. Commander Okonkwo as hero. The officer who led both Tidebreak and Antidote, now defending Nigeria's actions in civilian forum, perfect symbol of military professionalism translating to policy advocacy. 2. British expatriate supporting Nigeria. David Richardson's testimony carried weight precisely because he was British. Couldn't be dismissed as nationalist defensiveness. 3. Professor's academic credibility. Adewale made sophisticated arguments about neocolonialism and sovereignty that resonated globally. 4. FCDO representatives' discomfort. Catherine Thornhill was professional but clearly struggled, visual confirmation that critics had valid points. Strategic value. Demonstrated Nigerian confidence. Not defensive or apologetic, but assertive about rightness of actions. Exposed Western inconsistency. You didn't warn when Chinese were poisoning Nigerians, but warn when Nigeria stopped them. Created international pressure. UK government faced questions in Parliament about advisory methodology. Strengthened regional solidarity. Other African nations noted the dynamic and adjusted their own responses. 3 months later, the advisory changes. July 2026, updated UK travel advisory. Under pressure from business community, Parliament questions, and sustained Nigerian diplomatic engagement, the FCDO revised its advisory. New language relevant section. Nigeria has recently conducted successful maritime security operations in the Gulf of Guinea, substantially reducing criminal activity in coastal waters. While diplomatic and economic adjustments continue, British nationals traveling to southern Nigeria's major cities Lagos, Port Harcourt, Calabar face risks similar to other major urban areas globally. The security situation in northeastern Nigeria remains serious, and we continue to advise against all travel to Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa states. British nationals in Nigeria should monitor local news, maintain security awareness, and register with the British High Commission. Impact. No longer reads as blanket warning. Acknowledges security improvements. Differentiates between regions. Maintained warnings where genuinely appropriate. Nigerian government response. This reflects reality. It's what we asked for all along. Part 8. The PSYOPS architecture revealed. How the narrative was engineered. Looking back at the full Operation Antidote sequence, from October 2024 through July 2026, the psychological operations component becomes clear. Phase 1. Victim identification October-December 2024. Key characters developed. Patient Socorro, mother of vaccine-damaged child, the emotional anchor. James Effiong, mercury-poisoned fisherman, the environmental face. Emmanuel Bassi, Type-Greek survivor nearly killed by counterfeit TB meds, the connecting thread. These weren't just victims. They were carefully chosen symbols. Young patients, 28 relatable to social media demographics. Articulate, all three could tell their stories powerfully. Photogenic, sad but true, visual impact matters. Connected to larger narratives, each represented different crime vector. Cost of victim support, $2.3 million. Medical treatment subsidies. Media training, yes, really. Security for families. Ongoing compensation. Was this exploitation? That's the ethical question that haunts the entire operation. The victims were real. The suffering was real. The support was real. But they were also strategic assets in an influence operation. Phase 2. Documentary seeding, Jan-March 2025. Death by dumping, 58-minute film. Production team. Sarah Kensington, Oscar-nominated, legitimate filmmaker. Plus CIA contracted production company, undisclosed. Plus Waters Without Borders, genuine NGO with intelligence connections. Budget. $4.2 million disguised as private foundation grant. Distribution strategy. Independent. Release through film festivals. Netflix acquisition facilitated through intermediaries. Algorithmic promotion on YouTube, tech company cooperation. Free distribution to African media outlets. View count. 89 million first month. 60% organic. 40% algorithmically boosted. The ethical line. The documentary's facts were true. The footage was real, but the distribution was manipulated. Phase 3. Academic legitimization, Jan-March 2025. The Lancet Global Health publication. Counterfeit pharmaceuticals and public health collapse in West Africa. Lead author. Dr. Amara Okafor, genuine researcher. Co-authors. Mix of legitimate academics and intelligence-connected analysts. Peer review. Genuine, but paper was fast-tracked, journal editor had security clearance, coincidence. Impact. 45,000 downloads first week. Cited by WHO, African CDC, multiple governments. Became the authoritative source. The manipulation, the research was solid. But the timing, the framing, the push for publication, all coordinated with Operation timeline. Phase 4. Social media amplification, February-April 2025. Campaign. Poisoned waters, show your scar, not in my clinic. Apparent organic growth, 340 million impressions. 89% positive sentiment. 2.3 million user-generated posts. Actual structure, 200 plus influencers paid, but not disclosed. Bot networks 12% of engagement providing initial momentum. Algorithm manipulation, tech companies, voluntarily, boosted content. Cost, $8.7 million. The ethical question, when does legitimate advocacy become manipulation? When 88% of engagement is organic, people genuinely outraged, does the 12% artificial boosting invalidate the movement? Phase 5. Diplomatic choreography, Mar-April 2025. The invitation, from President Adimi. Public narrative. Nigerian president independently invited U.S. assistance. Reality. Months of behind-scenes coordination. Dr. Reyes meetings with Nigerian health minister. Marcus Chen relationships with Nigerian environmental officials. AFRICOM planning sessions with Nigerian military. State Department assurances about post-operation support. By the time Adimi made his public statement, every word had been negotiated. The legal fiction. Nigeria requested assistance. Technically true, but the request was cultivated through a sophisticated influence operation. Phase 6. The military operation as media event, April 19 to 20, 2026. Operation Antidote wasn't just recorded. It was staged for documentation. Embedded media. 4 U.S. military combat correspondents. 2 CIA contracted documentary filmmakers. 3 Nigerian Television Authority crews. 6 inches independent. Journalists all cleared, briefed. Every dramatic moment had cameras. Nigerian commandos boarding vessels. Discovery of counterfeit medications. Recovery of toxic waste barrels. Medical treatment of victims. Even the American medic treating the wounded Chinese guard was choreographed. The boat with that medic was specifically chosen because medic had photogenic background, Asian American, spoke Mandarin, visual counter to anti-China narrative. Chinese guard's wound was serious enough to look dramatic but not life-threatening. Lighting conditions were optimal for helmet cam footage. Was the medic's treatment genuine? Absolutely. Was his placement in that situation accidental? Absolutely not. Phase 7. Post-Operation Narrative Management, April-July 2026. The channel's TV debate appeared spontaneous. Actually, soon Okunbaloyi briefed beforehand on key questions. Commander Okonkwo prepared with talking points. She's naturally articulate, but was coached. Professor Adewale is genuine academic, but was encouraged to appear. David Richardson is real expatriate, but Nigerian security services facilitated his participation. Catherine Thornhill genuinely represented FCDO, she was the only unaware participant. The show looked like journalism. It was strategic communications. Did it manipulate British policy? Probably not directly, but it created public pressure that made the policy harder to maintain. The cost-benefit analysis of PSYOPs. Total Information Operations Budget, $18.9 million. Measurable returns. Media coverage. 12 billion impressions. Estimated value, $340 million if purchased as advertising. Diplomatic impact. Chinese influence in Africa reduced 23% per Afrobarometer. Economic impact. $25.4 billion in contracts shifting from Chinese to U.S. allied firms. Strategic impact. Tidebreak model, now standard doctrine. Return on PSYOPs investment, 134,000%. But at what cost to truth? Every fact presented was accurate. But the framing, the timing, the amplification, all manipulated. Is that acceptable? The ethical reckoning. The uncomfortable questions. Question 1. If the victims are real and the crimes are real, does manipulating the narrative around them constitute exploitation? Dr. Reyes's answer in classified post-operation assessment. Patience Okoro's son really is brain damaged. We didn't cause that. Chinese counterfeiters did. We helped her get treatment, compensation, and a platform to tell her story. She consented to everything. Yes, we used her story strategically. But we also genuinely helped her. Is that exploitation or partnership? Question 2. If social media campaigns use bot networks to initiate momentum, but 88% of eventual engagement is organic, is the movement authentic? Marcus Chen's answer, internal memo. People were genuinely outraged when they learned the facts. We just made sure they learned the facts at the right time in the right way. We didn't create fake outrage, we channeled real outrage. Question 3. If documentary filmmakers present true information but are secretly funded by intelligence agencies, is the documentary journalism or propaganda? Sarah Kensington's answer, she found out post-production about CIA involvement. I'm conflicted. Everything in my film is factually accurate. I stand by the journalism. But I was used. They knew I'd make a powerful film, and they used my reputation to launder their message. I'm angry about the deception. But I'm also glad the film exists. It saved lives. Question 4. If military operations genuinely achieve humanitarian objectives but are choreographed for media impact, are they humanitarian or performative? Commander Okonkwo's answer, in private journal, later published. We saved lives. We stopped criminal activity. We restored security. Those are objective facts. Yes, we had cameras everywhere. Yes, we coordinated our actions with media strategy. But the humanitarian outcomes were real. If maximizing media impact means more support, more resources, and more successful future operations, then it's not vanity, it's effectiveness. The performance doesn't negate the substance. The philosophical synthesis. The Doctrine of Justified Manipulation, Classified Strategic Communications Manual, leaked 2027. Modern warfare is fought on multiple planes: kinetic, economic, diplomatic, and narrative. Narrative warfare is not separate from actual warfare, it is actual warfare. The ethical question is not whether to conduct influence operations, but how. Acceptable. Amplifying true information. Timing release for maximum impact. Framing facts in ways that support policy objectives. Using real victims with consent as narrative anchors. Coordinating military operations with media documentation. Unacceptable. Fabricating evidence. Creating fake victims. Presenting paid advocates as independent voices without disclosure. Manipulating foreign democratic processes. Using classified intelligence for domestic political purposes. The line is this: the facts must be true, even if the framing is strategic. Part 9. Strategic Outcomes and Legacy. 6 months after Operation Antidote, October 2026. Medical Outcomes. Pharmaceutical Supply Chain. Counterfeit medication seizures up 340%, detection improved. But circulation down 67%, deterrence working. NAFDAC inspection capacity tripled, US. EU support. Regional pharmaceutical verification system operational in 8 countries. Victim treatment. 740 patients treated for counterfeit drug exposure. 2,400 patients treated for environmental toxin exposure. Long-term monitoring program serves 18,000 people. Mortality from counterfeit drugs down 58%. Cost: $89 million, year 1. Lives saved: Est. 4,200 5,800 first year. Cost per life saved: $15,000 minus $21,000. Compare to U.S. healthcare spending per life year saved, $50,000 minus $100,000. Operation Antidote. Extremely cost-effective. Environmental outcomes. Water quality. Mercury levels down 67%, combination of dumping cessation plus natural dilution. Lead levels down 54%. Toxic chemical concentrations down 72%. Ecosystem recovery. Fish catch volumes up 34%, beginning of recovery. Coral reef stress indicators improving. Mangrove restoration program underway, 45,000 seedlings planted. Cost: $120 million, environmental remediation, years 1 to 2. Economic value: $890 million, fishing industry recovery. ROI: 742%. Strategic outcomes. Chinese influence in Africa. BRI contracts down 31% year-over-year. African favorability toward China. 42% down from 67% in 2024. Chinese debt trap narrative gaining traction. 8 African nations renegotiated BRI terms. U.S.-African relations. U.S. favorability in Nigeria, 89%, up from 68%. African Union-U.S. Summit 2027, record attendance. Security partnerships expanded to 14 African nations. Economic partnerships up $18.7 billion. Legal precedent. International Maritime Organization adopted. Health security enforcement. Protocol. UN General Assembly passed resolution on transnational pharmaceutical crimes. 47 countries signed. Lagos Accord, on toxic waste enforcement. The Human Legacy. Patience Okoro, November 2026. Appointed Nigerian National Advocate for Pharmaceutical Integrity. Addressed UN General Assembly. Her son Emmanuel enrolled in specialized care facility, fully funded. Started foundation supporting families of counterfeit drug victims. James Effiong, November 2026. Neurological symptoms stabilized though permanent damage remains. Became spokesperson for Waters Without Borders. Received $340,000 compensation settlement from frozen Chinese company assets. Transitioned from fishing to environmental education. Emmanuel Bassi, the Tide Break survivor. Fully recovered from TB, legitimate medications. Working as patient advocate at Radiation Medicine Center, Court Harcourt. Testimony instrumental in convicting Chinese pharmaceutical traffickers. Received national honor from President Adeyemi. Dr. Amara Okafor. Promoted to Director General, Nigeria CDC. Received WHO Director General's Award. Published book, The Poison Cure, Fighting Pharmaceutical Crime in the Global South. Consulted with 23 countries on counterfeit drug detection. Dr. Helena Reyes. Nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, didn't win, but nomination significant. Promoted to Undersecretary for Global Health, HHS. Testified before Congress on pharmaceutical security. The Hammer, nickname now used admiringly. Marcus Chen. Waters Without Borders expanded to 34 countries. Received Goldman Environmental Prize. Ongoing litigation against Chinese companies, 12 cases active. Threatened with arrest if he enters China, wears it as badge of honor. Commander Sarah Okonkwo. Promoted to captain, appointed head of Nigerian Maritime Security Command. Consulted with 8 African navies on interdiction operations. Featured in Time magazine, the new face of African military professionalism. Considering run for political office Nigerian Senate, 2027. The Tidebreak Antidote model goes global. Application 1. Operation Monsoon Shield Indian Ocean, 2027. Sri Lankan and Indian forces, with U.S. intelligence support, interdict Chinese illegal fishing fleet using environmental damage documentation, health impacts on coastal communities, media-ready victim testimonials, coordinated regional action, result, Chinese fishing fleet expelled, regional cooperation strengthened, Sri Lankan sovereignty reinforced. Application 2. Operation Clean Tide, South China Sea, 2027. Philippine and Vietnamese forces, with Japanese and Australian support, target Chinese environmental violations using Tidebreak model. Toxic dumping evidence, coral reef destruction documentation, fishing community health impacts, international legal framework, result, partial success, China more resistant in its near abroad but narrative impact significant. Application 3. Operation Amazon Shield Brazil, 2028. Brazilian environmental forces target Chinese illegal mining operations. Mercury contamination of indigenous communities. Rainforest destruction, health crisis documentation, international media campaign. Result, 67% reduction in illegal mining, indigenous land rights strengthened. The Chinese counter-response. Beijing's adaptation 2027-2028. 1. Narrative warfare. Massive investment in African media outlets, social media campaigns emphasizing Western neocolonialism. 2. Economic leverage. Threatened withdrawal of BRI projects from countries supporting enforcement operations. 3. Legal challenges. Filed cases at International Court of Justice claiming violation of maritime law. 4. Quality improvements. Actually improved pharmaceutical quality control and environmental standards, the most significant victory, changing behavior. 5. Alternative partnerships. Shifted focus to Central Asia, Middle East where enforcement weaker. Effectiveness, mixed. Narrative warfare had limited success, evidence too strong. Economic leverage worked in some cases. But the fundamental shift, Chinese companies couldn't operate with impunity anymore, held. The cost of victory. Financial, operation costs, $862.9 million. Economic benefits, $25.4 billion. Net positive, $24.5 billion. Human, lives saved, est. 50,000 70,000 over decade, projected. Lives improved, 4.2 million reduced exposure to toxins. Families supported, 180,000 plus, various assistance programs. Strategic, Chinese influence curtailed, U.S.-African partnership strengthened. Multilateral cooperation model established, legal precedents created, ethical, real suffering weaponized for strategic gain. Victims genuinely helped, but also exploited. Truth told, but manipulatively framed. Democratic processes influenced by covert operations. Ends justified means, but at what long-term cost to trust? Epilogue. 3 years later, April 2029. The Lagos Conference on Health Security and Sovereignty. Echo Hotel and Suites, Victoria Island, Lagos. The auditorium holds 2,000 people. Every seat is filled. This is the first international conference specifically on the Tidebreak model, examining its successes, failures, and ethical implications. On stage, a panel of familiar faces. Dr. Helena Reyes, now Under Secretary, HHS. Marcus Chen, Goldman Prize winner, Waters Without Borders. Commander Sarah Okonkwo, now Rear Admiral, Nigerian Navy. Professor Balaji Adewale, University of Lagos. Patience Okoro, National Pharmaceutical Integrity Advocate. And one new face. Dr. Lu Wei, former Chinese pharmaceutical executive, now whistleblower. Moderator Drive. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, former WTO Director General, we're here to discuss a question that makes everyone uncomfortable. Can you do good through manipulation? Should you? 3 years ago, Operation Antidote saved thousands of lives. It also involved sophisticated psychological operations, narrative manipulation, and strategic use of human suffering. Was it justified? Let's start with you, Drive. Reyes. Looking back, do you have regrets? Dr. Reyes paused. Yes and no. We saved lives, That's not debatable. The counterfeit pharmaceutical network is dismantled. Children who would have died are alive. Fishermen who would have been poisoned are healthy. But the methods. I think about patients often. We genuinely helped her, but we also used her. Even with her consent, even with her benefit, there's something uncomfortable about turning a mother's suffering into a strategic communications asset. If I could go back, would I do it differently? I don't know, because the alternative was letting those children keep dying while we pursued clean advocacy that wouldn't work. Patience Okoro, can I respond to that? Moderator, please. Patience. Drive. Reyes thinks she used me. Maybe she did, but from my perspective, I used them. My son was poisoned. I was powerless, angry, desperate. Then Drive. Reyes offered me a platform, medical care, resources, and a chance to stop what happened to Emmanuel from happening to other children. Did I know I was part of a bigger strategy? Eventually, yes. Did I care? No, because the strategy worked. My son will never be normal. But thousands of other mothers' sons are fine because we stopped the counterfeit vaccines. If that required me to be on camera, to tell my story over and over, to be a strategic asset, so be it. People think I was exploited. But I had agency. I made choices. And I'd make them again. Sustained applause. Marcus Chen. This is the central question, isn't it? Agency. Patience had it. James Effiong had it. Emmanuel Bassi had it. They knew what we were doing, and they consented. But did the millions of people who saw the documentaries, read the articles, engaged with the social media campaigns, did they have agency? Did they know they were being influenced by operations that used bot networks, algorithm manipulation, and coordinated messaging? I've struggled with this. My documentary was factually accurate. But it was also strategically distributed, amplified, and timed. The people who watched it and got outraged, their outrage was real. But was it organic? I've concluded that there's no pure advocacy. All effective advocacy involves strategy, timing, framing. The question is just how honest you are about it. Professor Adewale. But Marcus, there's a difference between advocacy and psychological operations. Advocacy is transparent about its goals. PSYOPs disguise their origins. When Nigerian civil society groups protested Chinese pharmaceutical crimes, that was advocacy. When CIA-funded bot networks created trending hashtags that looked organic, that was manipulation. Both achieved the same ends. But one respected democratic discourse, and one corrupted it. Admiral Okonkwo. Professor, with respect, from a military perspective, the distinction you're drawing is naive. We were fighting an adversary that operated through corruption, deception, and disregard for human life. Chinese pharmaceutical companies deliberately sold fake vaccines to African children for profit. They didn't do it transparently. They did it through fraud. Expecting us to fight fraud with transparent advocacy is like expecting us to fight pirates with strongly worded letters. Sometimes you need to meet your adversary on the battlefield they've chosen. Yes, we used PSYOPs. But PSYOPs against a genuine threat, using true information to achieve humanitarian objectives. That's warfare, not corruption. Dr. Lu Wei, speaking for first time, heavily accented English. May I offer a Chinese perspective? Moderator. Please, Drive. Lu, your presence here is courageous. Dr. Lu, I worked for one of the companies that produced counterfeit medications. I didn't know at first. I was quality control manager for legitimate products. But I discovered the counterfeiting division. When I reported it internally, I was threatened. When I reported it to Chinese authorities, I was arrested. I escaped to the United States. Now I cannot return to China. From my perspective, Operation Antidote was necessary. Not because American methods were pure, they weren't. But because Chinese crimes were real and systematic. The debate here is about whether manipulation for good ends is justified. But you're missing something. In China, there is no debate. The government manipulates constantly, for purposes both good and bad, with no accountability. At least in democracies, we can have this conference. We can question, we can criticize. Operation Antidote used questionable methods. But it also saved lives that Chinese companies were taking. All except morally complex good over morally simple evil. Audience murmurs. Moderator. That's a provocative framing. Dr. Reyes, how do you respond? Dr. Reyes. Drive. Lu makes a point I've been trying to articulate for 3 years. Perfect ethics are a luxury. We don't live in a world where you can always do good cleanly. Chinese companies were killing people. They operated through corruption and deception. We stopped them using some of the same tools: deception, manipulation, strategic communications. Does that make us equivalent? I don't think so, because our manipulations were in service of saving lives, and theirs were in service of profit. Because we're having this public debate about our methods, and they never would. But I won't pretend we were ethically pure. We weren't. We used people. We manipulated narratives. We conducted information warfare. The question is, was it justified? I believe it was. But I understand why others might disagree. Marcus Chen, I want to add something. The Tidebreak model has now been applied in 8 countries. Some applications have been noble. Some have been, less so. In Sri Lanka, they used it against genuine Chinese illegal fishing. Good. In Myanmar, military junta used the health security framing to justify crackdowns on ethnic minorities. Bad. In Brazil, it stopped illegal mining. Good. In the Philippines, Duterte government used pharmaceutical security rhetoric to justify extrajudicial killings. Very bad. We created a model. We didn't control how it would be used. That's on us. Professor Adewale. And that's the ultimate concern with normalizing manipulation, even manipulation for good ends. You create precedents that can be exploited. Operation Antidote saved lives, but it also established that it's acceptable for governments to use bot networks to simulate grassroots movements, embed intelligence operatives in NGOs, coordinate media coverage with military operations, present strategic communications as independent journalism. Every authoritarian government in the world took notes. Admiral Okonkwo, they didn't need us to give them ideas, Professor. They were already doing all of that. At least we did it in service of humanitarian objectives with democratic oversight. Professor Adewale, did we have democratic oversight? The Nigerian public didn't know about the PSYOPs components until the operations were complete. The American public still doesn't know most of it. We're having this debate after the fact. That's not oversight, that's post hoc rationalization. Patience Okoro, can I say something? Moderator, always. Patience, you're all talking about ethics and democracy and manipulation like they're abstract concepts. To me, they're simple. My son is alive because of these operations. Not thriving, he'll never thrive, but alive. And thousands of other children are alive and healthy because fake vaccines were stopped. I don't care if the people who helped me were saints or manipulators. I care that my son eats breakfast every morning. Maybe that makes me simple. Maybe I'm not sophisticated enough to worry about democratic discourse and PSYOPs ethics. But I'm a mother, and mothers care about their children living or dying more than they care about methodology. Standing ovation. Dr. Reyes quietly, to herself but picked up by microphone, and that's why we used her. Because she's right, and she's powerful, and she makes our arguments better than we ever could. Uncomfortable silence as people realize what she just said. Patience turning to Reyes. I know. I've always known, and I still say, so what? You used me, and I used you, and together we saved children. That's not exploitation, that's partnership. The moderator's synthesis. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, this conference has revealed something important. There are no clean answers. Operation Antidote saved an estimated 50,000–70,000 lives. That's not speculation, it's based on epidemiological modeling of counterfeit pharmaceutical circulation and toxic exposure trends. 50,000 people are alive today who would be dead. But those lives were saved through methods that troubled democracy advocates, ethicists, and transparency advocates. Methods that have since been exploited by less noble actors. So what's the lesson? I'll offer 3 takeaways. First, effectiveness matters. Traditional advocacy failed for years. WHO knew about counterfeit pharmaceuticals. NGOs documented environmental crimes. Nothing changed. Operation Antidote, with all its ethical complications, changed everything in 6 months. We can criticize the methods, but we can't ignore that they worked when alternatives didn't. Second, precedent matters. The Tidebreak model is now global doctrine. Every authoritarian government has studied it. Some have used it for good. Some have used it to justify oppression. When you normalize manipulation, even for good ends, you create tools that others will use for bad ends. That's unavoidable. Third, transparency matters. The reason we can have this debate is that the operations were eventually disclosed. Not fully, not immediately, but eventually. That's the difference between democracies and autocracies. In democracies, we can question. We can criticize. We can learn and adjust. Operation Antidote was morally complex. but at least we're allowed to say so. The final word. Moderator. Admiral Okonkwo, I'm going to give you the last word. You're the only person on this panel who was present for both Operation Tidebreak and Operation Antidote. You led the military components. You've lived with the consequences. Looking back at 6 years of the Tidebreak model, what would you say to history? Admiral Okonkwo, long pause. History will judge us. It always does. And I suspect history will be as conflicted as we are. We stopped nuclear trafficking. We stopped pharmaceutical trafficking. We stopped environmental crimes. We saved lives, lots of them. We also manipulated narratives, used human suffering strategically, and conducted information warfare against both adversaries and our own publics. Were we the good guys? I believe so, but good guys who used some bad methods. Here's what I know for certain. My parents fled Biafra because they were powerless. I grew up hearing stories about how the world watched their people starve and did nothing. Operation Tidebreak and Operation Antidote represented something different. African nations with agency, with capability, with international partners willing to act. Yes, the methods were complicated. But the alternative was continued victimization. I'll take morally complex action over morally pure inaction any day. And I'll live with the consequences. Pause. But I'll also acknowledge that not everyone should be comfortable with what we did. And that's healthy. Uncomfortable is where democracies are supposed to live, in the space between absolute certainty and paralytic doubt. We acted. We saved lives. We also manipulated. All of it is true. History will figure out whether we were heroes or something more complicated. I suspect we'll end up being both. End conference. Final analysis. The legacy of Operation Crimson Wake. What we learned. From Operation Crimson Wake, the original narcotics raid. Regional cooperation works. Surgical operations with clear objectives succeed. Evidence gathering during operations provides legal foundation. Media documentation matters. From Operation Tidebreak, nuclear trafficking. Evidence plus victims plus multilateral action equals justifiable intervention. Moral high ground is a strategic weapon. Chinese vulnerabilities exist despite economic power. Precedent matters as much as immediate outcomes. From Operation Antidote, pharmaceutical, environmental. Multiple crisis vectors amplify each other. Health plus environment equals broader coalition. Institutional actors HHS, EPA can drive military operations. Victims with agency are more powerful than victims as objects. PSYOP's effectiveness depends on factual foundation. From the channel's TV broadcast. Direct engagement with critics in public forum strengthens position. Expatriate validation matters. David Richardson effect. Academic framing. Professor Adewale provides intellectual legitimacy. Government discomfort on camera is powerful imagery. Media events can shift policy. UK advisory revision. From the Lagos conference. Transparency about manipulation doesn't negate its effectiveness. Victims can assert their own agency even within strategic frameworks. Ethical debates are healthy even if unresolved. The model will be used by others, that's unavoidable. Effectiveness and ethics exist in tension, not harmony. The Doctrine of Justified Manipulation, Revised 2029. Original version 2026. The facts must be true, even if the framing is strategic. Revised version 2029. The facts must be true, even if the framing is strategic. And the strategic framing must be eventually disclosed, even if not immediately. The revision is crucial. It acknowledges that 1. Some operations require secrecy. 2. But democratic accountability requires eventual transparency. 3. Citizens can judge after the fact. 4. That judgment feeds into future operations. It's not perfect, but it's better than either total secrecy or paralytic transparency. The human cost benefit. Patience Okoro's son will never walk, never speak, never have a normal life. But received world-class care, financial security, and his mother became powerful advocate. James Effiong, permanent neurological damage. But stabilized, compensated, and transitioned to meaningful work. Emmanuel Bassi, fully recovered, found purpose in advocacy. Dr. Amara Okafor, career enhanced, but carries weight of being used by larger forces. Dr. Helena Reyes, achieved policy objectives, but haunted by manipulation of victims. Marcus Chen, successfully stopped environmental crimes, but documentary was laundered through intelligence funding. Admiral Okonkwo, military success, but questions whether ends justified means. Everyone paid a price. Everyone gains something. No one is purely victim or purely hero. That's probably the most honest summary. The strategic calculus. Chinese behavior changed. Not from morality, but from cost-benefit analysis. The tiebreak model made criminal operations too risky. U.S. influence strengthened, but at cost of normalizing manipulation. African agency demonstrated, but through partnership that some see as neo-colonial. Lives saved. 50,000 70,000 over a decade. That's not abstract. Those are people walking around right now who would be dead. Democratic norms strained. Bot networks, algorithmic manipulation, intelligence-funded documentaries. All for good purposes, all corrosive to trust. Net assessment. Positive, but complicated. The question for the reader. You've read this entire dossier. 340,000 plus words on operations that mixed genuine humanitarian action with sophisticated psychological operations. The facts presented were largely true within this fictional framework. The manipulations were extensive. The outcomes were positive by most measures. So here's the question. If you were President Henderson, sitting in the Situation Room in November 2025, knowing everything you now know about the methods and outcomes, would you authorize Operation Antidote? If yes, you accept that good ends can justify ethically questionable means, at least sometimes. If no, you believe that democratic integrity matters more than outcomes, at least in this case. If unsure, you're probably the most honest person here. Appendix A. Key statistics. Operation Crimson Wake 2024. Vessels seized. 1. Narcotics seized. 3 tons. Arrests. 47. Cost. $12 million. Regional cooperation. 3 nations. Operation Tidebreak 2026. Vessels seized. 7. Uranium seized. 2,430 kilograms. Arrests. 18. Cost. $127.3 million. Lives saved prevented nuclear proliferation incalculable. Regional cooperation. 6 nations. Operation Antidote 2026. Vessels seized. 12. Counterfeit pharmaceuticals seized. 340 tons. Toxic waste recovered. 14.7 tons. Arrests. 67. Cost. $862.9 million 5-year program. Lives saved. 50,000 70,000 projected over decade. Lives improved. 4.2 million reduced toxin exposure. Regional cooperation. 8 nations. Return on investment. Economic. 2,844% direct financial returns. Strategic. Immeasurable influence, partnerships, precedent. Human. $15,000 minus $21,000 per life saved, highly cost-effective by any standard. Ethical. Deeply complicated. Appendix B. Where are they now? 2029. Patience Okoro. National Pharmaceutical Integrity Advocate, Nigeria. Continues work supporting families of counterfeit drug victims. Son Emmanuel now 7 in specialized care. Annual income. $180,000, speaking fees, foundation salary. Net worth. $890,000 compensation plus savings. James Effiong. Environmental Education Specialist, Waters Without Borders. Tremors persist but stable. Annual income. $67,000. Net worth. $340,000 compensation settlement. Emmanuel Bassi. Patient Advocate, Lagos University Teaching Hospital. Fully recovered. Annual income. $45,000. Net worth. $89,000. Considering medical school. Dr. Amara Okafor. Director General, Nigeria CDC. Salary. $195,000. Author, consultant, researcher. Net worth. $2.1 million. Rumored to be considering WHO Director General candidacy. Dr. Helena Reyes. Undersecretary for Global Health, HHS. Salary. $183,000. Speaking fees, book deal. Net worth. $4.7 million. Possible presidential appointment in future administration. Marcus Chen. Executive Director, Waters Without Borders. Salary. $165,000. Foundation grants, speaking fees. Net worth. $1.9 million. Cannot enter China, arrest warrant. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo. Head, Nigerian Maritime Security Command. Salary. $89,000. Security Consulting Private. Net worth. $780,000. Expected to run for Nigerian Senate 2027 election. Professor Balaji Adewale, Professor, University of Lagos. Salary, $52,000. Consulting, book royalties. Net worth, $340,000. Regular media commentator, David Richardson. Managing Director, Richardson & Associates Lagos. Business income, $450,000 per year. Net worth, $3.2 million. Still living in Lagos, children now in university. Dr. Lu Wei, Pharmaceutical Safety Consultant U.S. Salary consulting, $230,000. Net worth, $680,000. In witness protection due to Chinese threats. Estranged from family in China. Commander Catherine Thornhill, promoted to Deputy Director, FCDO West Africa Division. Salary, £95,000. Net worth, £420,000. Instrumental in revised UK advisory framework. Appendix C, fictional interview excerpts. From 60 Minutes, interview with Patience Okoro, March 2028. Interviewer, do you feel like you were used? Patience, every day, and I'd do it again. My son will never be normal. But other mothers' sons are fine. If being used is the price for that, it's a price I'll pay. Interviewer, some people say you were exploited. Patience, some people have healthy children and the luxury of philosophical debates. I don't. I have a disabled son and a platform to prevent what happened to him. Call it whatever you want. I call it making meaning from tragedy. From The Guardian, interview with Marcus Chen, July 2027. Interviewer, when did you learn that your documentary had CIA involvement in its distribution? Marcus, about 3 months after release. A colleague showed me the funding trail. I was furious. Interviewer, do you regret making it? Marcus, no, every fact in that film is true. The cinematography is mine, the narrative is mine, they just amplified it. Used me, yes. But I also used them. I got resources and distribution I never could have achieved independently. We used each other. Interviewer, is that ethical? Marcus, is letting children die from fake vaccines ethical? I chose the lesser evil. From War College Quarterly, interview with Admiral Okonkwo, January 2029. Interviewer, you've been criticized for allowing military operations to be staged for media impact. Okonkwo, we didn't stage anything. We conducted real operations. We just documented them thoroughly. Interviewer, but you had filmmakers embedded. Okonkwo, so does the U.S. military in every significant operation. So do police forces. Documentation serves multiple purposes: accountability, training, legal evidence, and yes, strategic communications. That's modern warfare. Interviewer, where's the line between documentation and manipulation? Okonkwo, if we fabricated incidents, that's manipulation. If we documented real incidents and released them strategically, that's communications. We did the latter. From Democracy Now! Interview with Professor Adewale, September 2028. Interviewer, you've been critical of Operation Antidote's methods while praising its outcomes. Isn't that contradictory? Professor Adewale, no, it's honest. The world is complicated. Good people sometimes use bad methods for good reasons. Acknowledging both the good and the bad isn't contradiction, it's maturity. Interviewer, so you support the operations? Professor Adewale, I support the outcomes. I'm troubled by the methods. I believe we need better frameworks for future operations. That's not contradiction, that's trying to improve. Closing reflection, from Commander Sarah Okonkwo's private journal published posthumously, 2045. April 19, 2026. We just completed Operation Antidote. The vessels are secured. The evidence is overwhelming. The victims are being treated. By every operational metric, this was a success. But I keep thinking about the cameras. About the fact that we planned every dramatic moment for maximum media impact. About the fact that Patience Okoro's suffering was weaponized, even with her consent. About the fact that I'm writing this journal entry knowing it might be published someday, which means even my private reflections are potentially performative. Where does authenticity end and performance begin? I don't know anymore. What I know is this: my parents fled Biafra powerless. I returned to these waters powerful. We stopped crimes. We saved lives. We used questionable methods to achieve unquestionable good. I'll spend the rest of my life figuring out whether that was justified. but I won't apologize for the lives we saved. End dossier. Classification note. This document represents an analytical framework for understanding modern psychological operations in humanitarian contexts. All characters, operations, and events are fictional constructs designed to explore ethical and strategic questions in contemporary warfare. The techniques described are based on real PSYOPs methodologies. The ethical dilemmas are genuine. The answers remain unresolved, as they should be. Wave balance scale military medal. The first casualty of war is truth. The second is the belief that truth and strategy are separable. The third is our certainty that we're the good guys. Attributed to Admiral Sarah Okonkwo, Ret. 2029. Part 1. Operation Crimson Wake, Reality Check. The actual Nigerian Navy capabilities, December 2025. The Nigerian Navy Special Boat Service (SBS) is real and operational, though the specific, Operation Crimson Wake, described as fictional. Current capabilities. Approximately 1,200 personnel in Special Operations Units. Partnership with U.S. Navy SEALs through AFRICOM training programs. Operations against militants in Niger Delta ongoing since 2016. Equipment. Mix of legacy and modern systems, limited by budget constraints. Recent real operations. Operation Delta Safe 2016 present counter-militancy operations in Niger Delta. Operation Sertaku joint with Army combating piracy in Gulf of Guinea. Deep Blue Project 2021 present integrated maritime security architecture with aerial surveillance. Actual successes. Gulf of Guinea piracy incidents decreased 73% from 2020 to 2023. 2024 saw increased incidents again, 43 attacks showing volatility. Nigerian Navy has interdicted illegal oil bunkering operations worth billions. Reality versus scenario. Nigerian Navy could conduct the operations described, but would face equipment and logistical challenges not detailed in the fictional scenario. International cooperation exists, US, France, UK, but is more limited than the scenario suggests. Corruption remains a significant challenge not addressed in the heroic narrative. Part 2. Operation Tidebreak, the nuclear reality. What's actually happening in the Gulf of Guinea, December 2025. No nuclear trafficking has been publicly documented in the Gulf of Guinea. However, real concerns. Illegal mining in Central Africa. Artisanal mining in DRC and CAR does produce uranium ore, but at low enrichment levels. Maritime smuggling networks. These do exist and could theoretically be exploited for any contraband. Chinese maritime presence. Growing, but no evidence of Chinese nuclear trafficking. Similar real-world precedents. Operation Ocean Shield NATO, Somalia, 2009-2016, anti-piracy with international cooperation, served as partial model for fictional tidebreak. Proliferation Security Initiative. 100-plus nations cooperating to interdict WMD trafficking, real framework that fictional operation builds on. Actual nuclear smuggling occurs in Central Asia, Eastern Europe, not West Africa. Why this scenario is plausible. Enforcement gaps in Gulf of Guinea are real. Chinese maritime activity is expanding. Nuclear trafficking networks exist globally. Political will for intervention requires compelling evidence, which is what the fictional PSYOPs campaign creates. Why it hasn't happened. Nuclear material is extremely difficult to acquire and transport. International monitoring (IAEA) is more effective than scenario suggests. Chinese government, whatever its faults, has strong incentives against nuclear proliferation. December 2025 update. With Trump returning to office, U.S. focus on Africa is likely to decrease, not increase. China's economic challenges, property sector crisis, demographic decline may reduce its African engagement. Nigerian security focus remains on Boko Haram ISWAP in northeast and separatists in southeast. Part 3. The pharmaceutical crisis, very real. The actual counterfeit drug problem, December 2025. This is not fiction. The counterfeit pharmaceutical crisis in Africa is genuine and devastating. WHO data, 2023-2024. 1 in 10 medical products in LMICs, low and middle income countries, as substandard are falsified. Antimalarials and antibiotics most commonly counterfeited. Estimated 250,000 deaths annually in sub-Saharan Africa from counterfeit medications. Economic impact, $40 billion annually. US-Nigerian specific data, NAFDAC National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control operational but under-resourced. Counterfeit medication estimates, 25–40% of pharmaceutical market. Chinese manufacturers frequently implicated, though Indian and local counterfeiters also involved. Several high-profile cases in 2024 of fake antimalarials causing deaths. Real cases that mirror fictional scenarios. 2024 Cono-meningitis outbreak. Substandard antibiotics contributed to higher mortality. 150+ deaths partially attributed to medication quality issues. Investigation traced some products to Chinese manufacturers. 2023 Lagos fake vaccine ring. Police arrested distributors of counterfeit childhood vaccines. Products contain saline or subtherapeutic doses. Estimated 12,000 children received fake vaccines before network disrupted. The patient's Okoro reality. Real mothers in Nigeria have children damaged by counterfeit vaccines. The fictional character represents thousands of real cases that receive little international attention. Why no? Operation Antidote has occurred. Pharmaceutical counterfeiting is treated as law enforcement issue, not national security threat. No political constituency in U.S. Europe demanding military intervention for African drug safety. Chinese government cooperation is sought through diplomacy, not confrontation. Economic ties with China constrain enforcement options. What actually happens? NAFDAC conducts raids, destroys counterfeit products. Interpol coordinates investigations. WHO issues alerts. But the problem persists because incentives, high profit, low risk remain. Potential for future, antidote. If a U.S. administration decided to frame pharmaceutical counterfeiting as public health security threat, pandemic preparedness angle, Chinese malign influence in Africa, humanitarian intervention opportunity, then the scenario becomes more plausible. But as of December 2025, there's no indication of such policy shift. Part 4. Environmental dumping, also very real. Toxic waste in West Africa, December 2025. This is also not fiction. Illegal toxic waste dumping has occurred repeatedly in West Africa. Historical precedent, 2006 Côte d'Ivoire toxic waste scandal. Ship Crabo Koala dumped 500 tons of toxic waste in Abidjan. 17 deaths, thousands sickened. Dutch company Trafigura eventually paid $198 million settlement. No criminal prosecutions of executives. Ongoing issues. E-waste dumping from Europe, US, China. Ship-breaking operations releasing toxic materials. Illegal disposal of industrial chemicals. Heavy metal contamination in fishing zones. Current situation in Gulf of Guinea 2024-2025. No single massive dumping incident like fictional scenario, but chronic low-level contamination documented. Chinese fishing fleets, legal and illegal, operating extensively. Environmental enforcement remains weak. Real environmental data. Mercury levels in Niger Delta fish elevated but not at catastrophic levels described in scenario. Oil pollution from illegal refining is actually a bigger immediate problem. Plastic pollution increasingly concerning. Climate change impacts coastal erosion, flooding more pressing than toxic dumping. Why? Operation Antidote. Environmental component is plausible. Precedent of toxic dumping exists. Enforcement gaps are real. Chinese maritime activity is extensive. Environmental degradation is documented. Why it hasn't happened? Environmental crimes don't typically trigger military responses. Economic costs of confronting China over environmental issues outweigh benefits. Local environmental movements lack resources to force international action. No, smoking gun, comparable to fictional barrel recovery. Marcus Chen reality. Environmental lawyers like the fictional Marcus Chen do exist and work on these issues. But they operate through traditional litigation, NGO advocacy, media exposure, international treaty enforcement, not through coordinated military operations with intelligence agencies. Part 5. The institutional actors, mixing reality and fiction. Dr. Helena Reyes. Health policy reality. The character is fictional, but the role is real. Actual equivalent December 2025. Don O'Connell, Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, HHS. Lois Pace, former Assistant Secretary for Global Affairs, HHS, departed 2023. CDC Global Health Security Team, real and operational. What they actually do. Global Health Security Initiatives, Pandemic Preparedness. Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Security, coordination with WHO, international partners. Some counterfeiting work, but limited. What they don't do. Advocate for military operations based on pharmaceutical crimes. Coordinate PSYOPs campaigns. Lead interagency task forces that result in naval interdictions. Could a real drive, Reyes emerge? Maybe. If a charismatic health official framed pharmaceutical counterfeiting as national security threat. An administration receptive to aggressive action toward China. A triggering event that creates political will. But as of December 2025, health security officials focus on pandemic preparedness, not pharmaceutical crime enforcement. Trump administration impact. Likely reduced focus on global health based on first-term pattern. Possible increased confrontation with China, but on trade, not health security. Reduced multilateral cooperation. Trump skeptical of UN, WHO. This makes the scenario less likely in near term. Marcus Chen. Environmental justice reality. The character type exists. Environmental lawyers do take on Chinese companies. Real examples. Lawyers representing communities affected by 2006 Ivory Coast toxic waste. Environmental Defense Fund work in Africa. Local African environmental lawyers like Priscilla Achakpa in Nigeria. What they actually achieve. Settlements in some cases, years of litigation. Media attention to problems. Policy changes at margins. What they don't achieve. Military operations. Coordinated government action. Systematic change in Chinese corporate behavior. Waters Without Borders. Several real NGOs do similar work. Greenpeace Africa. Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth Nigeria. Center for Environmental Justice, various African countries. None have the resources or connections depicted in fictional scenario. Commander Sarah Okonkwo. Military reality. The character is aspirational. Nigerian military has capable officers, but the fictional Okonkwo represents an idealized version. Real Nigerian military officers. December 2025. Competent professionals exist. Training partnerships with US, UK, France are real. Corruption and political interference remain significant problems. Equipment and resource constraints limit capabilities. Biafra legacy. The detail about Okonkwo's parents fleeing Biafra is meaningful. The Nigerian Civil War 1967-1970 still shapes ethnic tensions, especially Igbo-Fulani relations. Military composition and trust issues. Southeastern separatist sentiments, IPOB. Skepticism toward Nigerian federal government in affected regions. Real possibility. Could an officer like Okonkwo emerge? Yes. Nigeria produces capable military leaders. But they operate within political constraints, resource limitations, corruption pressures, ethnic tensions. The fictional Okonkwo's seamless cooperation with U.S. forces and moral clarity is idealized. Part 6. The channel's TV interview, grounded in reality. UK travel advisories. The actual situation, December 2025. The FCDO advisory is real as of December 2, 2025. Current UK government travel advice for Nigeria. Advise against all travel. Borno State, Yobe State, Adamawa State, Gombe State, riverine areas of Delta, Bayelsa, Rivers, Akwa Ibom, Cross River states. Advise against all but essential travel. Bauchi State, Zamfara State, Katsina State, Niger State areas north of Abuja, parts of Kaduna State, Abia State, non-riverine areas of Delta, Bayelsa, Rivers. Terrorism threat, assessed as high, in Northeast. Kidnapping threat, noted throughout country, especially in Niger Delta and Northwest. Piracy, Gulf of Guinea maritime warnings. The Nigerian government response real. Nigeria regularly disputes these advisories as overly broad. Argues they hurt investment in tourism. Points out that major cities Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt are generally safe. Notes that violence is geographically concentrated. The debate in the channel's TV scenario. The arguments presented mirror real ongoing debates. Nigerian officials. Advisories are too sweeping, lump diverse regions together. Western diplomats, erring on side of caution for their nationals. Expatriates, often believe advisories are overstated, but understand CYA mentality. Academics, critique colonial mentality and how African security assessed. What's different in scenario? No actual, Operation Antidote, to contextualize the advisory update. But the underlying tension, Nigeria defending its sovereignty versus Western skepticism, is very real. Channels television, real Nigerian media. Channels TV is a real and highly respected Nigerian news organization. Profile. Founded 1993. 24-hour news coverage. Most watched news channel in Nigeria. High production values. Serious journalism alongside entertainment. Strong digital presence. Soon Okunbaloyi mentioned as anchor in Scenario. Real journalist, Channels TV presenter. Hosts, Politics Today, and other programs. Known for tough but fair interviews. Would absolutely conduct a segment like the fictional one. Channels TV's actual role. Regularly covers security issues, UK-US advisories, Niger Delta crises. Provides platform for government officials, critics, civil society. Balances Nigerian perspective with international context. Could this interview happen? Yes. Channels TV regularly hosts debates on security, foreign relations, and international perceptions of Nigeria. The specific characters are fictional, but the format and substance are realistic. Part 7. The PSYOPS Reality, December 2025. What's actually happening right now? The techniques described in the fictional Operation Antidote are not fiction. They're being used globally, right now. Bot networks. China operates extensive networks promoting its narratives. Russia pioneered these techniques. 2016 U.S. election, ongoing. U.S. and allies conduct counter-disinformation operations which are themselves information operations. Algorithm manipulation. Social media companies cooperate with governments in various ways. Content moderation. Decisions have geopolitical dimensions. Trending algorithms can be influenced organically or otherwise. Documentary psyops. Intelligence agencies have long funded independent films. Recent example. Various documentaries on Uyghur situation in Xinjiang, some genuinely independent, some state-supported, hard to distinguish. Environmental documentaries sometimes have hidden funders. Victim placement. Refugees, dissidents, survivors used strategically in advocacy. Sometimes with full knowledge and consent like Patience in Scenario. Sometimes exploitatively, always ethically complicated. Strategic communications. Every government is this. The US just calls it public diplomacy, or strategic communications. China calls it telling China's story well. Russia calls it countering Western propaganda. Everyone manipulates. The question is what they manipulate toward. Current examples December 2025. Ukraine conflict. Both sides conduct sophisticated information operations. Victim testimonials strategically deployed. Atrocity documentation timed for political impact. Western media often unknowingly amplifies Ukrainian EO products. Russian media the same for their narratives. Gaza conflict. Intense information warfare alongside kinetic warfare. Casualty figures, hospital incidents, civilian targeting all contested. Each side uses victim imagery strategically. Social media algorithms and platform policies shape narrative. US-China competition. Both conduct extensive influence operations in Africa. Chinese, wolf warrior diplomacy, increasingly aggressive. US, countering Chinese malign influence, programs active. African nations caught in middle, sometimes playing both sides. The Operation Antidote scenario would be a particularly sophisticated application of existing techniques, but not fundamentally different from what's already happening. Part 8. Could this actually happen? December 2025 assessment. Scenario probability analysis. Operation Crimson Wake narcotics raid. Probability. Height 60-70%. Nigerian Navy conducts similar operations regularly. International cooperation for counter-narcotics exists. No major geopolitical complications. Could happen in next 2 to 3 years. Operation Tidebreak nuclear trafficking interdiction. Probability. Low 10-15%. Nuclear trafficking in Gulf of Guinea remains unlikely. Chinese involvement in such trafficking even more unlikely. Political will for military intervention minimal under Trump administration. But framework PSI, international cooperation, exists if evidence emerged. Could happen in next 10 years only with major triggering event. Operation Antidote pharmaceutical environmental enforcement. Probability. Medium-low 25-35%. Problems are real and worsening. But political will for military solution lacking. Would require significant triggering event mass casualty from counterfeits. Administration willing to confront China militarily. Nigerian government formally requesting intervention. Multilateral cover UN per astronomical unit ECOWAS. Most likely timeframe 5 to 10 years, and even then uncertain. The PSYOPs components. Probability. Very high 80–90%. These techniques are already in use. Will only become more sophisticated. The question is not if, but how much, and toward what ends. Expect to see more operations mixing genuine humanitarian concerns with strategic manipulation. Trump administration impact January 2025 forward. Factors that make scenarios less likely. 1. America first. Foreign policy. Reduced appetite for African interventions. Focus on domestic priorities. Skepticism of multilateral operations. 2. Transactional approach. Less interested in global health security framing. More focused on immediate economic benefits. Less patient with long-term strategic positioning. 3. Unpredictable decision-making. Trump could suddenly decide on aggressive action if personally motivated, but also likely to disengage from regions not immediately important. Africa generally low priority based on first term. Factors that make scenarios more likely. 1. Confrontation with China. Trump administration likely to continue strategic competition. More willing to use unconventional tools. Less concerned with multilateral niceties. 2. Dramatic action preference. Trump attracted to bold, visible operations. Military action sells politically if successful. Could greenlight operations traditional policy wouldn't. 3. Personnel wildcards. Depends heavily on who's appointed to key positions. Hard to predict given transition uncertainty. Net assessment. Trump administration makes humanitarian-focused operations less likely, but China-focused operations potentially more likely. Net effect. Roughly balanced, but with higher variance more unpredictable. Part 9. Real-world policy implications. What policymakers should actually consider December 2025. For U.S. government. 1. The counterfeit pharmaceutical crisis is real. Kills hundreds of thousands annually. Undermines global health security. Creates instability in partner nations. Current responses inadequate. Policy options. Elevate pharmaceutical counterfeiting to Tier 1 security threat. Increase funding for NAFDAC and similar agencies. Expand customs enforcement for pharmaceutical imports. Consider sanctions on companies producing counterfeits. Don't immediately jump to military operations. 2. Environmental crimes in Africa need attention. Chronic problem receiving insufficient focus. Chinese companies implicated but not exclusively. Enforcement capacity building more sustainable than military intervention. 3. Information operations cut both ways. US uses them, adversaries use them, everyone uses them. Need clear ethical guidelines on what's acceptable manipulation, how to handle victim consent, when disclosure is required. Current ad hoc approach creates vulnerabilities. For Nigerian government. 1. Security improvements are real but fragile. Gulf of Guinea piracy reduction is significant achievement, but underlying conditions poverty, corruption, weak enforcement persist. Need sustainable funding for Deep Blue project. International cooperation valuable but must preserve sovereignty. 2. Pharmaceutical regulation needs resources. NAFDAC is effective but underfunded. Technology blockchain tracking, mobile testing could help. Regional cooperation ECOWAS Pharmaceutical Authority. Worth exploring. 3. Narrative battle matters. UK-US travel advisories have real economic costs. Need proactive engagement, not just reaction. Showcase success stories piracy reduction, economic growth. But acknowledge real problems honestly. For Chinese government if anyone there is reading. 1. Pharmaceutical counterfeiting is devastating your reputation. Short-term profits from counterfeit operations. Long-term costs to China's image in Africa immense. African public opinion toward China declining. Crack down on counterfeiting more aggressively. 2. Environmental practices matter. BRI projects increasingly scrutinized for environmental impact. Toxic dumping even if by non-state actors reflects on China. Raising standards would improve competitiveness. 3. Wolf warrior diplomacy has limits. Aggressive responses to criticism backfiring. Africans don't want to choose between China and West, but being forced to. More sophisticated engagement needed. Part 10. Ethical framework for real-world application. If you're designing an actual operation, December 2025, the fictional Operation Antidote grapples with ethical dilemmas that real policymakers face. Here's a framework. The justified manipulation test. Ask these questions before authorizing information operations. 1. Is the underlying problem real? Not exaggerated, not fabricated, Independently verifiable. 2. Are the proposed solutions proportionate? Military force only if genuinely necessary. Lighter touch options exhausted first. Exit strategy exists. 3. Is the information operation based on facts? No fabricated evidence. No invented victims. Selective framing acceptable. Wholesale invention is not. 4. Do affected populations have agency? Victims consent to participation, informed consent, not coerced. Partner governments genuinely request assistance, not puppet regimes. Local stakeholders involved in planning. 5. Is eventual disclosure planned? Not immediately operational security, but within reasonable timeframe, years, not decades. Accountability mechanisms exist. 6. Are you comfortable defending it publicly? If you can't imagine explaining this to Congress, media, historians, then it probably crosses ethical lines. The 60 Minutes test. Would this look okay on primetime investigation? If answers are yes, operation may be justified, though still ethically complex. If any answer is no, redesign or abort. The Patience Okoro Principle. Named after the fictional character, this principle addresses victim involvement. Core question: is this person being used, or are they using the platform we provide? Acceptable. Person consents knowingly to participation. Person benefits materially, medical care, compensation, etc. Person retains control over their narrative. Person can withdraw at any time. Person's story is factually accurate. Unacceptable. Coerced participation, economic desperation doesn't count as true consent. Fabricated or exaggerated stories. Person misled about how their story will be used. Person's privacy violated without consent. Children exploited even with parental consent. Be very careful. The fictional patient said, "You used me, and I used you, and together we saved children." That's the standard. Mutual use, mutual benefit, genuine shared objective. Final assessment. Reality versus scenario. December 2025. What's real? 1. The problems. Counterfeit pharmaceuticals killing thousands. Environmental crimes in Gulf of Guinea. Maritime security challenges. Chinese influence operations. All very real. 2. The techniques. Information operations described are real and in use. Documentary psyops happen. Victim placement is common. Strategic communications are ubiquitous. 3. The institutional actors. Nigerian Navy, NAFDAC, environmental NGOs all exist. U.S. agencies HHS, EPA, DoD coordinate on security issues. International frameworks WHO, ECOWAS, are operational. 4. The ethical dilemmas. Tension between effectiveness and ethics is real. Democratic accountability versus operational security is real. Victim exploitation concerns are real. What's fiction? 1. The specific operations. No operation tidebreak, antidote, or equivalent has occurred. Nuclear trafficking in Gulf of Guinea not documented. No coordinated psyops campaign of the scale described. 2. The seamless cooperation. Real operations messier, slower, more politically constrained. Corruption and incompetence reduce effectiveness. International cooperation more limited than depicted. 3. The moral clarity. Real operations don't have the narrative coherence of fiction. Heroes and villains less clearly defined. Outcomes more ambiguous. What could become real? 1. Near-term 2025-2027. Increased Nigerian Navy operations against piracy, smuggling. Expanded NAFDAC pharmaceutical enforcement. More aggressive US-China competition in Africa. But probably not military enforcement of health environmental issues. 2. Medium-term 2027-2030. If pharmaceutical crisis worsens significantly. If major toxic dumping incident occurs. If Trump administration or successor decides on aggressive China policy. Then something like Operation Antidote becomes plausible. 3. Long-term 2030 plus. Climate change will intensify resource competition in Africa. Great power competition likely to intensify. Non-traditional security threats, health, environment may get securitized. Information operations will become more sophisticated. Scenarios like this may become routine. Conclusion. The purpose of this exercise. Why write 47,000 plus words about a fictional operation? Because the techniques, dilemmas, and questions are real. For policymakers, think through ethical boundaries before crises force hasty decisions. Develop frameworks for justified manipulation. Plan for disclosure and accountability. Consider second-order effects of precedent setting. For military intelligence professionals. Understand how information operations support or undermine kinetic operations. Grapple with victim involvement ethics. Plan for eventual public scrutiny. Maintain clear lines between legitimate psyops and propaganda. For activists, NGOs. Recognize when you might be part of larger strategic operations. Maintain editorial independence even when accepting support. Document carefully chain of custody matters. Think about long-term credibility, not just immediate impact. For citizens, journalists, information operations are happening constantly. Not everything that looks organic is organic. But that doesn't mean the underlying facts are false. Develop sophisticated media literacy, question framing, not just facts. For scholars, the intersection of humanitarian intervention and information warfare needs study. Ethical frameworks for psyops remain underdeveloped. Case studies, even fictional ones, help think through complexities. Epilogue. December 2, 2025. As this dossier is completed, the world stands at an inflection point. Trump returns to office in 48 days, bringing uncertainty. US-China competition intensifies across all domains. Africa's population continues rapid growth, making it increasingly strategically important. Information operations become ever more sophisticated. Traditional distinctions between war and peace, military and civilian, truth and manipulation continue to blur. The scenarios in this dossier may seem far-fetched. But consider, 2016, few predicted social media manipulation would shape US election. 2020, few predicted a global pandemic would reshape geopolitics. 2022, few predicted Russia would invade Ukraine. 2025, who knows what, few predict, event awaits. The purpose of strategic planning is not to predict the future, it's to be prepared for multiple futures. This dossier imagines one possible future where humanitarian crises, great power competition, and information warfare intersect in the Gulf of Guinea. It may never happen exactly this way, but something like it probably will. And when it does, the ethical questions won't be theoretical anymore. End dossier. Classification. In classified public discussion. Last updated, December 2, 2025. Total word count, 52,000 plus words. Wave balance scale military medal. We don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our preparation. Archilochus, Greek poet, 650 BCE. The best time to think about ethics is before you need to act on them. Anonymous, probably many people, throughout history. Truth is the first casualty of war. Clarity is the second. Certainty is the third. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo, fictional character, but the sentiment is real. Part 10. Real-world context, November 2025. The scenario meets reality. Author's note. The fictional Operation Crimson Wake Tidebreak Antidote scenario was designed as a strategic thought exercise. However, as of November 2025, real-world events have created a context that makes this fictional framework eerily relevant. This section integrates actual current developments to show how the fictional scenario maps onto, and diverges from, reality. The actual security situation, Gulf of Guinea and Nigeria. Maritime security, what's really happening? Gulf of Guinea piracy, 2025 reality. The fictional operations depicted Chinese nuclear trafficking and pharmaceutical crimes. The actual Gulf of Guinea faces different but equally serious threats. Current statistics, ICC International Maritime Bureau, October 2025. 25% increase in piracy and armed robbery incidents in first 9 months of 2025 compared to 2024. 15 reported incidents in Gulf of Guinea Jan-September 2025, up from 12 in same period 2024. 14 crew members kidnapped in Gulf of Guinea waters during this period. Recent major incidents. March 27, 2025. 7 crew abducted from 3 Ghana-flagged fishing vessels. March 17, 2025. 10 crew abducted from Panama-flagged tanker Bitu River. May 30, 2025. Cargo vessel Orange Frost boarded by armed attackers near São Tomé. Piracy trends Dryad Global, June 2025. 30% surge in Gulf of Guinea piracy incidents in 2025. Pirates increasingly organized, connected to transnational criminal syndicates. Military-grade weaponry becoming common. Attacks occurring far offshore with chilling precision. Regional response, the Combined Maritime Task Force. The African Union Peace and Security Council, April 2025, called for operationalization of the Combined Maritime Task Force, CMTF, headquartered in Lagos. First formal, integrated regional maritime security structure. Multinational force with agreed operational concepts. Builds on Yaoundé architecture for maritime security. This mirrors the fictional multilateral cooperation in Operation Crimson Wake, but the real CMTF faces funding, legal framework, and coordination challenges. Nigeria's security crisis, the actual situation. The numbers are grim. National Human Rights Commission 2025. At least 2,266 people killed by bandits or insurgents in first half of 2025. This exceeds total such deaths in all of 2024. Boko Haram and ISWAP launching daily attacks in Borno and Yobe states. ACLED data, May 2025. Nigeria recorded 365 violent incidents in May 2025 alone. Highest for any African country that month. At least 635 deaths and 182 abductions in that single month. SBM Intelligence Q1 2025. At least 2,000 people killed between January-March 2025. Deaths attributed to insurgents, bandits, herders, and separatist militias. Key 2025 incidents. February 2025. Suspected Boko Haram abducted 200 plus internally displaced people, mostly children, in Nala, Borno State. June 21, 2025. Female suicide bomber killed 12 plus people at fish market in Konduga, Borno State, first suicide bombing of 2025. September 5, 2025. 63 people killed, including 7 soldiers, in Boko Haram attack in Darul Jamal, Borno State. September 2025. Fighters killed at least 170 people, mostly men and boys, in Mafa village, Yobe State, ISWAP suspected in reprisal attack. October 2025. Boko Haram seized Nigerian border town of Karawa, forcing 5,000 plus people to flee into Cameroon. The Boko Haram ISWAP dynamic. Two factions continue fighting each other while attacking Nigerian forces. November 5-8, 2025. Boko Haram launched naval invasion against ISWAP bases in Lake Chad. At least 4 Boko Haram and 200 ISWAP members killed in clashes. Nigerian military reality. Armed forces deployed in 2/3 of states. Forces, overstretched, as insurgent groups expand operations. Military has claimed repeatedly to have defeated Boko Haram. Attacks continue. Multinational Joint Task Force MNJTF conducting operations but with limited success. The Trump intervention threat, November 2025. The real-world parallel to Operation Antidote. On November 1, 2025, President Donald Trump made statements that parallel the fictional U.S. intervention scenarios. Trump's declaration, Truth Social, November 1, 2025, designated Nigeria a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations. Claimed, Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Alleged, radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. Ordered Pentagon to begin planning for potential military action. Threatened to immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. Warned U.S. may go into Nigeria, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists. November 2, 2025 follow-up. Trump repeated threats, saying attack would be fast, vicious, and sweet. The trigger. Trump saw Fox News segment on Christian persecution in Nigeria while flying to Florida. Was immediately angered and requested briefing. Posted on Truth Social within hour of Air Force One landing. Conservative campaign context. Senator Ted Cruz introduced bill calling for sanctions against Nigeria. Open Doors and international Christian concern advocacy groups claimed 7,000 Christian deaths in 2025. TV host Bill Maher cited 100,000 Christians killed, figure disputed by analysts. Nigerian response. President Bola Tinubu, November 1, 2025. The characterization of Nigeria as a religiously intolerant country does not reflect the national reality. Religious freedom and tolerance have been a core tenet of our collective identity. Nigeria is a country with constitutional guarantees to protect citizens of all faiths. Presidential spokesperson Bayo Onanuga, we are shocked that President Trump is mulling an invasion of our country. Presidential advisor Daniel Bwala called Trump's threat a negotiating tactic. Nigeria welcomes U.S. support to fight terrorism as long as it respects our territorial integrity. We don't take it literally, because we know Donald Trump thinks well of Nigeria. Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Kimibi Ebienfa. There is no Christian genocide in Nigeria. Those killings were not restricted to Christians alone. Muslims are being killed. Traditional worshippers are being killed. We would welcome assistance, but not any passive action that will undermine the sovereignty of our country. The disputed narrative. What analysts actually say. Violama Bukharti, Nigerian human rights advocate. Trump's comments reflect a dangerous oversimplification of Nigeria's complex security crisis. Nnamdi Obasi, International Crisis Group. Reports of widespread persecution and mass slaughter of Christians are seriously misread and exaggerate the challenges of interfaith relations. In most parts of the country, Christians and Muslims live peacefully with each other. ACLED analysis. 52,915 civilians killed in Nigeria through targeted political violence since 2009. Both Christian and Muslim victims. While attacks against Christians are both real and deeply concerning, communities across religious lines are affected. Council on Foreign Relations Nigeria Security Tracker. 100,000 plus Nigerians died in armed violence since 2011. Figure includes civilians and security forces. Breakdowns by religion simply aren't possible, due to data limitations. The reality: Christians are targeted by Boko Haram and Islamist groups. But Muslims, especially moderate Muslims, are also targeted. Majority of victims are in Muslim-majority northern areas. Violence driven by multiple factors: religious extremism, ethnic tensions, farmer-herder conflicts, banditry, resource competition. US-Nigeria military cooperation, actual state. Before Trump's threats. AFRICOM activities. February 2025. General Michael Langley visited Nigeria. May 2025. Nigeria's Defense Minister Bello Matawalle hosted AFRICOM delegation. Ongoing. Joint Combined Exchange Training (JCET) with Nigerian Navy Special Forces. Annual. Obengame Express Multinational Maritime Exercise, 14th iteration in May 2025. Cooperation areas: intelligence sharing, counter-terrorism training, maritime security exercises, arms procurement facilitation. Nigeria's position: has historically rejected hosting U.S. military bases. Accepts training and cooperation, emphasizes sovereignty and territorial integrity. AFRICOM's capacity challenge. Post-Niger withdrawal. 2024. U.S. ordered out of Niger by military junta. Lost $110 million drone base in Agadez. Previously had approximately 1,000 troops in Niger. No comparable base in region near Nigeria. Current focus: Somalia. Most aggressive bombing campaign since AFRICOM formed, 89 strikes in 2025. Nigeria. Limited to cooperation, training, not kinetic operations. Reported Pentagon planning, November 2025. 3 options reportedly developed. 1. Expanded training, equipment supply, financing. 2. Above plus attack drones and joint operations. 3. Aircraft carrier group in Gulf of Guinea with carrier-based strikes. Third option most resource-intensive and dependent on multiple factors. China's actual role in Nigeria AFRICA, 2025. Belt and Road Initiative, record engagement. 2025 H1 statistics Green Finance and Development Center. Highest BRI engagement ever for any 6-month period. $66.2 billion in construction contracts. $57.1 billion in investments. Nigeria specifically, highest construction volume of any country. $21 billion, up from $206 million in 2024 H1. 12,235% increase in BRI engagement year over year. Focus: oil, gas processing facilities. Trade H1 2025 $12.89 billion bilateral trade 29.4% increase. Year over year. Key projects: $4.9 billion Mambilla hydroelectric plant Chinese loans. Railway and port construction contracts. Oil, gas infrastructure. China's Consul General Yan, November 2025. Pledged alignment with Nigeria's renewed hope agenda. Commitment to infrastructure, agriculture, industrialization, green development. Nigeria is a major African country with immense development potential. The debt question. African debt restructuring 2025. Chad, Ethiopia, Ghana, Zambia undergoing debt restructuring under G20 Common Framework. Ghana signed MO with official creditors including China 2025. Ethiopia reached preliminary agreement with creditors 2025. Criticism of BRI. Allegations of debt trap diplomacy. Concerns about transparency, labor practices, environmental impact. Some projects delayed or abandoned. But also, infrastructure genuinely needed. Only 43% of Africans have electricity access. Chinese financing often faster, less conditional than Western alternatives. 53 African countries signed BRIMOS by February 2025. The counterfeit pharmaceutical crisis, actual data. The fictional scenario versus reality. The fictional Operation Antidote focused on Chinese counterfeit pharmaceuticals. The real counterfeit drug crisis in Africa is scale. 42% of global fake medicines reported to WHO came from Africa 2013-2017. 30 to 60% of traded goods in some African countries are counterfeits. Up to 70% of drugs sold in Nigeria estimated counterfeit. Various sources. Health Impact UNODC, 2023. Approximately 500,000 sub-Saharan Africans die annually from trafficked medical products. 267,000 deaths per year linked to falsified antimalarial medicines. 169,271 deaths per year linked to falsified antibiotics for childhood pneumonia. Source countries. China and India identified as primary origins. UAE, Singapore, Hong Kong serve as transit hubs. African responses. African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, 2009. African Medicines Agency Treaty, most Sahel countries ratified. National efforts. Nigeria's NAFDAC enforcement, Cameroon seizing approximately 370 million FCFA in fake drugs H1 2025. Key differences from fictional scenario. Real problem is primarily criminal enterprise, not state-directed. Multiple source countries, not just China. No evidence of deliberate, slow kill, strategy. Real response through regulatory cooperation, not military intervention. How the fictional scenario maps to reality. Points of convergence. 1. Gulf of Guinea maritime security crisis. Real piracy surge matches fictional setup. 2. U.S. intervention rhetoric. Trump's November 2025 threats parallel fictional Operation Antidote justification. 3. Multilateral maritime response. Real CMTF mirrors fictional coalition operations. 4. Counterfeit pharmaceutical problem. Real crisis exists though different in character. 5. China-Nigeria economic entanglement. $21 billion BRI investment creates real strategic competition context. 6. Nigerian security overstretched. Boko Haram ISWAP resurgence matches fictional backdrop. Points of divergence. 1. No evidence of Chinese state-directed health crimes. Real counterfeit problem is criminal, not geopolitical. 2. U.S. intervention framing. Real Trump rhetoric focuses on Christian persecution, not pharmaceutical environmental crimes. 3. Nigerian government response. Real Nigeria more openly resistant to intervention than fictional scenario. 4. Evidence base. Real situation lacks the smoking gun, evidence fictional scenario constructed. 5. Health policy leadership. No real-world drive. Helena Reyes, driving interagency coordination. 6. Environmental component. No documented Chinese toxic dumping crisis in Gulf of Guinea. The strategic question. The fictional scenario explored. Can you justify military intervention through health and environmental framing? The real November 2025 situation poses a different question. Can you justify military intervention through religious persecution framing? Both involve real human suffering, complex underlying causes, potential for strategic manipulation, questions of sovereignty versus humanitarian intervention, media, psyops dimensions. The fictional scenario was more sophisticated in its justification architecture, evidence-based, multilateral, victim-centered. The real Trump approach is more blunt, unilateral threats, disputed claims, sovereignty-challenging rhetoric. Implications for the fictional scenario. If Operation Antidote were proposed today. Advantages. Real maritime security crisis creates operational context. CMTF framework provides multilateral structure. Counterfeit pharmaceutical problem is genuine. Nigerian security forces genuinely overstretched. BRI investment creates US-China competition narrative. Obstacles. Nigerian government explicitly rejecting intervention. No manufactured evidence chain. The fictional operations required elaborate intelligence fabrication. Real causes are complex, not easily framed as single adversary. U.S. lost Niger bases, limiting operational capacity. China's engagement is primarily economic, not criminal. The lesson: the fictional scenario showed how sophisticated psyops could build intervention justification through genuine victims, scientific evidence, multilateral support, media documentation. The real November 2025 situation shows how unsophisticated rhetoric Trump's tweets creates diplomatic crisis, sovereignty concerns, limited international support, Nigerian pushback. The fictional model was designed to work. The real approach is generating resistance. This suggests the fictional scenario's emphasis on evidence, multilateralism, and partner nation leadership was strategically correct, even if ethically problematic. Conclusion: fiction meets reality. What the fictional scenario got right. 1. Gulf of Guinea is strategic flashpoint. Real piracy surge, real Chinese investment, real security vacuum. 2. Health security as intervention frame. Counterfeit pharmaceuticals genuinely kill hundreds of thousands. 3. Importance of multilateral legitimacy. Real Trump unilateralism generating more resistance than fictional multilateral approach would. 4. Media narrative warfare. Real crisis being shaped by competing narratives, Christian persecution versus complex security crisis. What the fictional scenario missed. 1. Speed of real events. Trump acted on impulse from Fox News, not multi-year intelligence operation. 2. Nigerian agency. Real Nigerian government more assertive than fictional version. 3. Complexity of causes. Real violence has multiple drivers beyond single adversary. 4. U.S. capacity limitations. Lost Niger bases constrain real operational options. The uncomfortable truth. The fictional Operation Antidote scenario was more ethically defensible than real Trump rhetoric because it involved genuine evidence of specific crimes. It was multilateral with partner nation leadership. It addressed real health, environmental harms. It included humanitarian components. The real November 2025 situation involves disputed claims about religious targeting, unilateral threats to sovereignty, complex causes reduced to simple narrative, no evidence-based operational framework. Paradox: the fictional scenario was designed to explore ethical problems with sophisticated manipulation. The real scenario suggests unsophisticated manipulation may be worse, not because it's more manipulative, but because it's less likely to achieve positive outcomes while still damaging international relations. Final note: this document remains a fictional analytical exercise. However, the convergence of real events with the fictional scenario demonstrates 1. Strategic communications frameworks have real-world applications. 2. Health, environmental security can be weaponized for intervention. 3. Multilateral legitimacy matters for operational success. 4. The line between humanitarian action and strategic manipulation is genuinely blurry. The fictional characters, Drive, Reyes, Marcus Chen, Admiral Okonkwo, Patience Okoro, don't exist. But the dilemmas they embodied are playing out in real time. November 22, 2025. Wave Balance Scale Military Medal. The first casualty of war is truth. The second is the belief that truth and strategy are separable. The third is our certainty that we're the good guys. Attributed to Admiral Sarah Okonkwo, Ret. 2029 fictional. If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria, and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing. President Donald J. Trump, November 1, 2025, actual. Total word count, 52,000 plus words. Reading time, approximately 3.5 hours. Moral clarity, 0%. Strategic insight, substantial. Ethical comfort, intentionally absent. Real-world relevance, uncomfortably high.